When my husband's phone lit up during our anniversary, planning a single message turned my entire marriage to ice. The text read, "The baby has your eyes, we miss you." I did not scream. I did not cry. Instead, I smiled, added her name to my bridesmaid list, and waited for the exact moment she realized her walk down the aisle was actually a march to her own execution. My name is Claire, and I am 32 years old. The heavy soundproof doors of the Boston commercial recording studio were supposed to keep the noise of the city out. But tonight, sitting alone at the massive mixing console long after the last audio engineer had gone home, the silence in the room was absolutely deafening. It was past midnight on a Thursday. My eyes burned from staring at the glowing spreadsheets on my laptop. I was not looking at studio budgets or artist contracts. I was auditing the quarterly expense reports for my husband's commercial real estate and logistics firm. I rubbed my temples, trying to massage away a tension headache that had been lingering for weeks. For 7 long years, I had been the invisible engine powering Liam's success. When we got married, Liam was drowning. His father had left him a logistics company buried in debt and crippled by terrible vendor contracts. I loved him with that blind, fierce devotion you only possess in your 20s. I believed in his vision, so I made the ultimate sacrifice. I liquidated the modest trust fund my grandparents had left me. It was my only safety net, my future security, but I handed every single penny over to save his sinking ship. I did not stop there. While I worked my way up to operations manager at the studio, handling demanding producers and frantic musicians all day, my nights belonged entirely to Liam's business. I managed his payroll, balanced his complicated ledgers, and organized his administrative life completely for free. I was his unpaid chief financial officer, working tirelessly in the shadows, so he could shine brightly in the spotlight. And shine he did. Liam was 34, charismatic and effortlessly charming. He played the part of the self-made corporate titan perfectly. He bought tailored Italian suits, took potential investors to expensive downtown steakhouses, and charmed the Boston business elite with his easy smile. Everyone thought he was a financial genius. No one knew his wife was up until 2 in the morning fixing the massive tax discrepancies he was too busy to notice. Just an hour earlier, Liam had called me from a client dinner. His voice was smooth, dripping with that practiced affection he used so effectively. He told me to make sure I ordered the premium silk napkins for our upcoming vow renewal. We were planning a massive, lavish ceremony at an exclusive country club to celebrate our 5th wedding anniversary. He insisted on it. He said it was to show the world exactly how much he appreciated everything I did for him. "Honey, just hold on a little longer," he had murmured through the phone, the clinking of expensive wine glasses audible in the background. "Once we close this new warehouse deal, we are set. Early retirement, a beautiful house in the suburbs, and finally that family we have been talking about forever. You are my rock, Claire. I promise it will all be worth it." I had smiled into the receiver and told him I loved him. But sitting here now, staring at a confusing discrepancy of $4,000 in a petty cash account, a profound wave of emotional exhaustion washed over me. I was running on empty. My job at the studio demanded constant attention. We were booking top-tier voice talent and managing incredibly tight production schedules. I spent my days putting out fires for demanding corporate clients, only to come home and put out financial fires for my husband. My own personal dreams had been put on hold indefinitely. I desperately wanted a child. I wanted to build my own business. But every single time I brought it up, Liam would gently brush it aside. He would say the timing was not right. The business needed more capital, or that we just needed one more solid year of grinding before we could finally relax and enjoy our lives. I swallowed my desires and kept working, trusting that the man I gave my entire youth and fortune to would eventually deliver on his grand promises. I saved his spreadsheet and closed the laptop, letting out a long, heavy sigh that echoed in the empty room. My back ached, my eyes were dry, and my soul felt scraped hollow. I looked around the dim studio, the platinum records shining faintly on the walls, realizing how much of my life was spent facilitating the success and wealth of others. I gathered my things, wrapped my thick wool coat around my shoulders, and headed out into the biting Boston night air. The city was quiet, the streets slick with a recent cold rain. I drove home to our upscale townhouse, letting myself in as quietly as possible. Liam was already asleep, breathing softly in our king-sized bed. The faint smell of expensive scotch and high-end cologne clung to his side of the room. I stood in the doorway, watching his chest rise and fall. He looked so peaceful, completely unburdened by the crushing workload I carried for him every single day. I crawled under the heavy covers, curling into a tight ball on the far edge of the mattress, feeling a strange, hollow distance between us. I closed my eyes and tried to force myself to sleep. Tomorrow was going to be another brutal day. I had a mandatory morning briefing at the studio, followed by a lunch meeting with the country club caterers to finalize the anniversary menu. Liam had promised to meet me there, swearing he would clear his schedule for this one important task. I drifted off to sleep, clinging to his promise, desperately hoping that the lavish vow renewal would magically fix the growing exhaustion in my heart. I believed that his success would finally become our success. I had no idea that the foundation I had broken my back to build was already rotting beneath my feet, and that the vow renewal he was so eager to throw was nothing more than a glittering stage for my ultimate destruction. When my husband's phone lit up next to the mixing console, a single message turned my entire marriage to ice. The text read, "The baby has your eyes, we miss you." I did not scream, I did not cry. Instead, I smiled, added her name to my anniversary bridesmaid list, and waited for the exact moment she realized her walk down the aisle was actually a march to her own execution. The day my world shattered started with a chaotic blur of sound checks and delayed talent arrivals. By noon, my nerves were completely frayed. I was standing over the main mixing desk at the Boston commercial recording studio, trying to untangle a scheduling nightmare when the heavy acoustic door swung open. Liam walked in carrying 2 brown paper bags from my favorite downtown deli. He was wearing his tailored charcoal suit, looking every bit the successful young executive in the logistics industry. He flashed that brilliant smile, the one that always made my heart flutter, and held up the bags like a peace offering. He said he knew I was stressed about planning our lavish 5-year vow renewal and wanted to surprise me with lunch. It felt like a perfect moment. I leaned in to kiss him, feeling a rush of guilt for being so focused on my work lately. He tasted like expensive mints and fresh coffee. We barely had time to unpack the sandwiches when his phone vibrated in his pocket. He glanced at the screen and his posture instantly stiffened. He told me it was a frantic overseas vendor and he needed a quiet space to talk. I pointed to the isolated vocal booth just behind the glass. He slipped inside, pulling the heavy door shut behind him. But in his rush to soundproof his conversation, he left his personal phone sitting face up right next to my audio interface. I took a bite of my sandwich, savoring the rare moment of quiet. Through the thick glass, I could see Liam pacing inside the booth, waving his hands as he spoke into his business phone. He looked stressed. I felt a surge of empathy for him, thinking about how hard he was working to build his company. I had sacrificed my own trust fund to save his business from bankruptcy years ago, and I believed his constant promises that an early retirement and a family of our own were just around the corner. I reached for my coffee, and my sleeve brushed against his personal phone resting on the console. The screen illuminated instantly. I did not mean to snoop. I never checked his phone in 7 years together because I never had a single reason to doubt him. But the bright notification banner demanded my attention. The name at the top of the message read, Jillian Logistics Intern. I remembered Jillian. She was a fresh college graduate he hired last spring. Liam had mentioned she was struggling to learn the supply chain software, so he had been mentoring her. I thought it was kind of him. I thought he was just being a good boss. Then my eyes fell to the text of the message itself. The words were short, but they possessed the destructive force of a freight train. The message said, "The baby has your eyes, we miss you." I stopped breathing. The air was violently sucked out of the room, leaving me suffocating in a vacuum of sheer terror. "The baby has your eyes." The words repeated in my mind, looping over and over like a broken record. "We miss you." My vision blurred and a loud ringing noise completely drowned out the ambient hum of the studio equipment. This could not be real. It had to be a joke, a wrong number, a bizarre mistake. But my brain, the same brain, trained to balance complex operational budgets and spot a missing decimal in a 100-page ledger, began connecting the dots with terrifying speed. The late-night meetings, the sudden weekend trips to logistics conferences, the missing cash I had noticed just the night before. He was not mentoring an intern. He was funding a secret second life. While I was draining my youth, my bank accounts, and my sanity to build his empire, he was playing house with a 24-year-old. While I was crying in the bathroom every month over negative pregnancy tests, he had given another woman a child. The physical pain was excruciating. It felt like someone had driven a jagged piece of glass directly into my chest and twisted it. A hot, suffocating wave of panic crashed over me. My hands shook so violently, I dropped my coffee cup onto the carpet. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw open the vocal booth door, hurl the phone at his perfectly handsome face, and demand to know how he could do this to me. I wanted to tear down the soundproof foam from the walls and collapse onto the floor in a puddle of tears. But I did not scream. I did not shed a single tear. The frantic, panicked wife was instantly silenced by the seasoned operations manager. If I confronted him now, he would lie. He would delete the evidence, gaslight me into thinking I misunderstood, and hide the assets I had worked so hard to build. He would use the wealth I gave him to crush me in a divorce court. I could not let him know I had seen his playbook. My hands stopped shaking. A cold, absolute clarity washed over my mind, freezing my shattered heart into solid ice. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out my own phone. I held it steady over his illuminated screen, making sure the glare from the studio lights did not obscure the text. I snapped a clear, high-resolution photograph of the message, the sender name, and the timestamp. I locked my phone and slid it back into my pocket just as the screen on his device faded to black. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of the deli sandwiches, forcing my heart rate to slow down. I wiped a single bead of sweat from my temple and pasted a warm, bright smile onto my face. Through the glass, Liam was wrapping up his call. He pushed open the heavy door of the vocal booth, letting out an exaggerated sigh of exhaustion. He complained about how demanding the overseas clients were and ran a hand through his hair, looking to me for sympathy. I picked up his phone from the console and walked toward him. I handed the device to him with a perfectly steady hand. I told him he worked too hard and that I could not wait to celebrate our anniversary and show him exactly how much he meant to me. He smiled, kissing my forehead, completely oblivious to the fact that he had just kissed his own executioner. The loving wife was dead. The psychological warfare had officially begun. The morning sun barely pierced the heavy Boston fog as I unlocked the door to my home office. Liam had left an hour earlier for a supposedly crucial breakfast meeting with a prospective commercial real estate client. He had kissed my cheek with that same practiced, flawless smile, adjusting his expensive silk tie before walking out the door. The absolute second the heavy oak door clicked shut downstairs, my entire demeanor shifted. I was no longer the devoted, supportive wife making sure her husband looked sharp for the corporate world. I was a seasoned forensic auditor stepping onto a battlefield. I did not even bother walking into the kitchen to pour a cup of coffee. My veins were already pumping with pure, unfiltered adrenaline. I sat down in my ergonomic desk chair and booted up my personal encrypted desktop. I launched the remote access portal for his logistics company. For 7 grueling years, I had built the administrative backend of this entire network. I knew every single password protocol, every hidden directory, and every financial backdoor. Liam loved to parade around the financial district, acting like the mastermind of his supply chain empire, but he conveniently forgot who had laid the very bricks of his digital fortress. I took a slow, deep breath, steadying my hands over the keyboard. My first target was the human resources database. I bypassed the standard managerial firewalls with administrative credentials I had secretly maintained and pulled up the active employee roster. I typed the name Gillian into the search bar. My fingers were remarkably steady, driven by a cold mechanical precision that completely overpowered my breaking heart. The file loaded instantly onto my high-resolution monitor. Gillian was certainly not an intern struggling to learn our logistics software. Her official corporate title was Junior Associate of Acquisitions. She was exactly 24 years old. I scrolled through her employment history and my stomach plummeted. Her start date coincided perfectly with the exact time Liam began taking sudden overnight trips to inspect new shipping warehouses down in Atlanta. Her compensation package was absolutely staggering. She was drawing a low six-figure base salary, complete with a quarterly bonus structure that rivaled our senior executive directors. He had brazenly put his mistress on our corporate payroll, bleeding the very company I had resurrected to fund her lavish lifestyle. But as I stared at her glossy corporate headshot, watching her young, unlined face smiling arrogantly back at me, I knew the bloated salary was just the surface of the rot. I closed the personnel file and dove much deeper, opening the master corporate ledgers. I started aggressively cross-referencing the accounts payable against our joint business accounts. These were the exact same accounts I had desperately seeded with my own modest trust fund to save him from bankruptcy early in our marriage. For years, I had lived incredibly frugally. I drove a 10-year-old sedan, clipped coupons, and skipped much-needed vacations, believing every spare dollar we saved was being reinvested into our shared future. Instead, the numbers cascading down my screen painted a horrifyingly different picture. I noticed a distinct pattern of irregular, exorbitant consulting fees billed to a vendor I did not recognize at all. The company was listed simply as Apex Harbor Holdings. There were no physical addresses attached to the invoices, just a registered agent in Delaware. I pulled the routing numbers from the cleared checks and ran them directly through our international wire database. My heart hammered against my ribs, creating a dull rhythmic thud that echoed in the quiet room. The funds were not going to a legitimate domestic vendor. They were being wired directly into an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. The sheer volume of the unauthorized transfers made me physically sick to my stomach. He had been meticulously siphoning $50,000 a month for over a year and a half. That was nearly $1 million of marital assets. That was money I had helped earn, money I had bled for during those agonizing 80-hour work weeks at the recording studio. I pulled up the digital wire authorization forms from the bank portal. Liam had forged my initials on the secondary approval lines, perfectly mimicking my signature to bypass the bank fraud detection protocols. I tracked the Cayman routing number using a specialized financial tracing tool I utilized for international studio contracts. The destination was not a corporate holding account for a logistics partner. It was a highly shielded private trust fund. With a few more keystrokes, I managed to pull the initial registration documents for the trust. The primary beneficiary was listed under a name I had never seen before in my entire life, a baby boy. I looked at the date of birth listed on the official trust documents. It was exactly 3 months ago. The air in my home office instantly turned to ice. The message from the studio mixing console violently replayed in my mind. The baby has your eyes. This was not a fleeting, careless affair. This was an entirely parallel life built on the ashes of my sacrifice. Liam was not just cheating on me physically, he was methodically and deliberately draining our life savings to secure a golden, luxurious future for his secret child and his 24-year-old mistress. He was purposefully hollowing out our marriage from the inside, preparing to leave me with an empty shell of a company and a mountain of fraudulent debt. The profound betrayal clawed at my chest, threatening to tear me apart, but the tears simply refused to fall. I calmly saved the documents, encrypted the files, and transferred them to a secure offline drive. I was no longer a heartbroken wife fighting to save her marriage. I was a defrauded creditor preparing for absolute war. The following morning, I stood in our sprawling marble kitchen, pouring premium roast coffee into Liam's favorite ceramic travel mug. The morning sun illuminated the expensive countertops we had purchased together. He walked into the room buttoning his tailored suit jacket, looking every inch the devoted, successful husband. I handed him the steaming cup and let out a perfectly rehearsed sigh of sheer exhaustion. I told him the recording studio was demanding entirely too much of my time, and the country club caterers were hounding me for final headcount numbers. I playfully leaned against his chest and admitted I was absolutely drowning in the complicated logistics of our 5-year vow renewal. I looked up into his bright blue eyes and casually dropped the carefully prepared bait. I told him I desperately needed a young, energetic assistant to handle the endless vendor calls and floral arrangements. I said I needed someone highly organized, but eager to please someone who could act as my right hand. I watched his mind work behind those deep eyes. A subtle flicker of sheer panic crossed his face, but it was instantly replaced by a sickeningly smooth wave of calculated opportunity. He kissed my temple and quickly suggested Jillian. He claimed she was a junior associate who needed more administrative experience, and assisting the boss's wife would be a fantastic corporate networking opportunity for her. I smiled brightly and kissed him back, thanking him for always solving my problems. He drove off to work thinking he was the absolute smartest man in Boston, completely unaware he had just handed me the exact weapon I needed. I arranged to meet Jillian at an upscale artisan cafe near the financial district exactly 2 days later. The place was bustling with corporate executives and trendy social media influencers, but the ambient noise faded into silence the moment she walked through the heavy glass doors. She was exactly what I expected. Jillian possessed that effortless glowing youth that only 24-year-olds have. She wore a tailored cream blazer that hugged her slender frame, and her bright blonde hair bounced slightly as she scanned the crowded room. When she finally spotted me, her face lit up with a brilliant, eager smile. It was the flawless performance of a respectful subordinate meeting the wealthy boss's wife. She hurried over to my table, apologizing profusely for being exactly 3 minutes late, claiming the supply chain software was giving her unexpected trouble. The sheer audacity of her casual lie was staggering. I knew she did not manage our logistics software. I knew she managed the offshore trust fund for the secret child she had with my husband. But my years of high-stakes corporate negotiations immediately kicked in. I stood up, pulled her into a warm embrace, and told her to sit down and catch her breath. I ordered her a highly caffeinated imported latte, acting like the gracious maternal mentor. Sitting across the small wooden table, I studied her carefully. It took every single ounce of self-control I possessed not to reach right across the delicate pastries and shatter her perfect, innocent facade. She spoke with a soft, melodic voice, continuously praising Liam for his visionary leadership at the logistics firm. She looked me directly in the eyes and thanked me for the generous opportunity to help plan such a beautiful celebration of our marriage. She said Liam spoke so highly of my endless dedication and that our relationship was an absolute inspiration to everyone at the corporate office. The psychological tension radiating through my body was agonizing. Her sweet words were dripping with pure lethal poison. She was actively mocking me to my face, truly enjoying the twisted thrill of sitting across from the clueless older wife while carrying the ultimate secret. I matched her toxic energy perfectly. I leaned in, listening attentively, and thanked her for her remarkably kind words. I told her how much Liam valued her hard work and how incredibly relieved I was to have someone so bright and capable handling the intimate details of our special day. I was laying the heavy bricks of her trap, and she was happily handing me the wet mortar. As she reached forward to pick up her warm latte, the tailored sleeve of her cream blazer slid slightly up her arm. The bright cafe lighting caught the dazzling reflection of a massive rose gold designer watch resting perfectly on her slender wrist. The air in my lungs instantly turned to solid ice. I knew that watch intimately. Just 3 weeks ago, while reconciling the company expense accounts late at night, I had flagged a highly questionable corporate withdrawal for exactly $12,000, categorized under executive client retention gifts. I had spent hours searching for the corresponding client receipt before Liam casually told me it was a luxury purchase for our biggest overseas shipping partner in Europe. Now that exact $12,000 piece of jewelry was resting comfortably on the wrist of his young mistress. The absolute sheer arrogance of wearing it to a meeting with me was breathtaking. It was a physical, glowing manifestation of my stolen life savings wrapped tightly around her arm. My heart hammered violently against my ribs, but my face remained a perfect mask of polite admiration. I reached out and gently touched her forearm, feigning pure, absolute delight. I gasped softly and told her the watch was absolutely stunning. I asked her where she managed to get such a gorgeous, exclusive piece. Jillian did not even flinch or look away. She offered a coy, blushing smile and looked down at the glittering diamonds. She softly replied that it was a very special gift from a man who meant the entire world to her. She said he was a generous, wealthy partner who always made sure she felt cherished and protected. The bitter bile rose sharply in my throat, but I swallowed it down with a long sip of my black coffee. I forced myself to smile so wide my jaw physically ached. I told her he sounded like a truly wonderful man and that a girl like her deserved nothing but the absolute best life had to offer. Then I smoothly shifted the conversation back to the upcoming vow renewal. I opened my leather planner and slid a beautifully embossed gold invitation across the wooden table toward her. I told her that Liam and I were currently struggling to finalize the wedding party because we only wanted our closest allies standing by our side. I explained that since she had been so incredibly helpful and since Liam considered her such a vital, important part of his inner corporate circle, I wanted to ask her a very important personal question. I reached right across the table and held both of her small hands in mine. I looked deeply into her lying, deceptive eyes and asked if she would do me the profound, incredible honor of being a bridesmaid in our anniversary ceremony. I told her I wanted her standing right up there on the grand altar with us, sharing in the most important, intimate moment of our entire lives. Gillian gasped loudly, placing a delicate hand over her mouth in a display of perfectly acted shock. Tears of fabricated joy pooled in her bright eyes as she squeezed my hands back and eagerly accepted the grand offer. She enthusiastically promised to do everything in her power to make sure the day was completely unforgettable for Liam and me. I smiled back, nodding my head in absolute sincere agreement. I told her I had absolutely no doubt she would make it a day no one in Boston high society would ever forget. She packed up her expensive designer bag and walked out of the bustling cafe, radiating the arrogant energy of total victory. I remained seated alone, finishing the last cold bitter sip of my coffee. My smiling enemies were now positioned exactly where I needed them. Gillian genuinely thought she was cementing her permanent place in Liam's wealthy future. She had absolutely no idea I had just personally dressed her for her own professional and social execution. The beautiful stage was finally set. The heavy mahogany clock in the hallway chimed 3 times. The deep sound vibrated through the silent townhouse. Liam was in Atlanta again, supposedly negotiating a new supply chain contract. I knew he was actually in a luxury hotel suite with Gillian. I stood in the doorway of his home office, holding a small brass key. I had quietly slipped off his secondary keyring earlier that week. My target was the vintage floor safe bolted beneath the floorboards in his closet. He always boasted that the safe held his most sensitive client contracts. My heart thumped against my ribs with a heavy rhythmic thud as I pulled back the thick Persian rug. The cold metal of this combination dial felt like a block of ice under my fingertips. I turned the dial carefully to the right, then left, entering the combination I had memorized years ago. With a solid metallic clack, the heavy door swung open, revealing a stack of thick manila envelopes. I pulled the top folder into the dim light of the desk lamp. The label read Personal Legal. I expected to find offshore bank records or maybe property deeds linking him to Gillian. What I actually found was infinitely more terrifying. I pulled out a thick stapled packet titled Post-Nuptial Asset Division Agreement. My breath caught in my throat. I flipped past the dense legal jargon directly to the signature page. There at the bottom was my name written in bright blue ink. The signature was a flawless, terrifyingly accurate replication of my own handwriting. I stared at the looping cursive letters, tracing the exact angle of how I crossed my letters. It was perfect, but I had absolutely never seen this document in my life. I read the clauses above the forged signature, and my stomach violently dropped. The agreement legally waived my right to any marital assets acquired during our 7-year marriage, including my stake in the logistics firm. It completely insulated Liam from alimony and explicitly stated I would assume full liability for any corporate debts linked to my name. A cold sweat broke out across my forehead. I reached back into the safe and pulled out the second envelope. This one was labeled Commercial Liabilities. My hands trembled as I slid the papers out. They were loan origination documents from 3 different private equity lenders. These were not standard business loans from our usual banking partners. These were aggressive high-interest mezzanine loans totaling nearly $8 million. The loans were secured entirely against the logistics company assets and personally guaranteed by the chief financial officer. My title. I flipped to the authorization pages. Every single loan bore my forged signature. The dates on the documents coincided perfectly with the timeline of the massive cash withdrawals I had traced to the Cayman Islands Trust Fund. The sheer scale of his criminal conspiracy finally crashed over me. Liam was not simply having an affair. He was orchestrating my absolute financial execution. He was using my forged signature to take out millions in toxic high-interest debt. He was then funneling that borrowed cash out of the company and straight into the offshore trust fund for Gillian and his secret child. Once the cash was safely hidden away in the Caribbean, he planned to file for corporate bankruptcy. Because my name was fraudulently tied to the loans, the private equity sharks would come directly after me. They would seize my home, my savings, and my future wages to satisfy the $8 million debt. Meanwhile, Liam would wave his forged post-nuptial agreement in a family court judge's face, claiming a clean break and walking away without a single scratch. He was planning to throw me to the wolves. He intended to saddle the woman who had given him her youth and her trust fund with a lifetime of unpayable debt. He would emerge looking like the tragic victim of a failed business, while I would be destroyed by federal bankruptcy laws. The betrayal was so deep, so entirely malicious, that it eclipsed the pain of his infidelity. Gillian and the baby were merely the destination. I was the sacrificial lamb funding their journey. If I did not act immediately, I would not just lose my marriage, I would lose my freedom. I would be dragged into endless civil and criminal litigation trying to prove I did not sign those papers. The courts would look at my title as Chief Financial Officer and assume I was the mastermind behind the missing millions. I sat on the floor of the dark office clutching the fraudulent papers to my chest. The suffocating weight of the panic slowly hardened into something entirely different. It condensed into a sharp, diamond-hard clarity. I was no longer a wronged wife crying over a younger mistress. I was the target of a devastating financial crime. I realized that crying would not save me. Begging Liam for the truth would only prompt him to destroy the evidence and accelerate his timeline. I had to outsmart a man who believed I was too blinded by love to notice the blade pressing against my throat. I carefully photographed every single page of the post-nuptial agreement and the fraudulent loan documents. I made sure the lighting caught the notary stamps and the forged signatures perfectly. I placed the documents back into their envelopes exactly as I had found them. I returned the folders to the heavy floor safe, locked the thick metal door, and rolled the Persian rug back into place. I stood up and walked over to the office window, looking out over the quiet Boston streets. The rain had stopped, leaving a pristine, chilling clarity in the night air. Liam thought he had engineered the perfect crime. He believed his administrative workhorse was too busy planning a lavish anniversary party to check the locks on her own cage. He had vastly underestimated the woman managing his books. I did not just need a divorce lawyer anymore. I needed a war room. It was a brisk Wednesday morning when I walked into the heavy mahogany paneled lobby of Boston's most feared corporate litigation firm. I did not need a standard family lawyer who would politely haggle over living room furniture and mutual bank accounts. I needed a financial assassin. I sat across from Harrison Caldwell, a veteran attorney legendary in the financial district for dismantling corrupt executives before they even realized they were under attack. He adjusted his silver wire glasses and spent 20 silent minutes meticulously reviewing the high-resolution photographs of the forged corporate loans and the fabricated post-nuptial agreement I had slipped across his massive desk. When he finally looked up, his expression was razor-sharp. He told me Liam had engineered a nearly flawless trap designed to legally annihilate me. But Harrison also noted that Liam had made one fatal, arrogant mistake. By dragging my name into federal commercial loans, he had crossed the line from a domestic dispute into severe corporate fraud. Harrison leaned forward, folding his hands, and told me we were not going to file for a messy public divorce. Instead, we were going to quietly, surgically separate my clean assets while building a waterproof legal bunker. We would let Liam continue to blindly dig his own grave, and then we would gladly bury him in it. The first step of our counterattack required absolute secrecy. During my lunch breaks at the recording studio, I funneled the remaining legitimate funds from my personal savings into a newly established blind limited liability company. I meticulously scrubbed my digital footprint, ensuring Liam would see nothing but routine grocery store transactions and utility payments on our joint ledgers. But securing my personal defenses was simply not enough. I needed to control the very ground Liam walked on. This was where my own silent wealth truly came into play. For years, Liam had treated my career as a cute little hobby, completely ignoring the immense corporate power structure behind my recording studio. He was entirely oblivious to the fact that the studio was a subsidiary of a massive international entertainment conglomerate. Through my operational role, I had cultivated a profound working relationship with the parent company board of directors. I knew from managing our annual property acquisitions that the conglomerate aggressively held massive tracts of industrial real estate across Massachusetts. I accessed the commercial zoning records and confirmed a brilliant tactical advantage. The sprawling industrial park housing Liam's primary logistics warehouse, his central shipping hub, and the crown jewel of his operations was built on leased land. And the master leaseholder was none other than the real estate division of my parent company. Liam's entire corporate empire relied on a property lease that was scheduled for renewal in less than 30 days. I requested a highly confidential meeting with the senior vice president of the conglomerate's real estate division. I did not ask for a favor based on pity. I presented a lucrative business proposition. I utilized my new blind company to quietly purchase the master lease rights for the exact parcel of land sitting directly beneath Liam's warehouse. I paid a premium for the acquisition using the last remnants of my untainted capital, but it was worth every single penny. I now legally owned the ground my husband operated on. I was his landlord, his primary creditor, and his ultimate judge, all while remaining completely invisible behind a veil of corporate legal protection. The hardest part of this war was not the complex financial maneuvering or the intense legal strategy sessions with Harrison. The true agony was returning to our upscale townhouse every single evening and playing the role of the devoted, oblivious wife. It required a level of psychological endurance that nearly broke my spirit. I would unlock the front door plaster, a warm, affectionate smile on my face, and greet the man who was actively trying to destroy my life. Liam would come home complaining about the exhausting demands of his shipping contracts, acting like the hard-working provider carrying the weight of our future on his broad shoulders. I would stand in our beautiful gourmet kitchen cooking his favorite meals and pouring his favorite expensive scotch. I listened to his lies night after night, nodding sympathetically as he talked about how the upcoming anniversary vow renewal was going to be the most magical day of our lives. He would pull me into a tight embrace, kissing the top of my head and promising that our struggles were finally coming to an end. I had to force my body not to physically recoil from his touch. I had to swallow the bitter, toxic bile rising in my throat as I smelled the faint, lingering scent of Jillian's expensive perfume clinging to his tailored suits. I smiled through the absolute horror of knowing he had just returned from visiting his secret infant son. I asked him mundane questions about his day, complimenting his business acumen and praising his dedication to our family. I fed his massive, arrogant ego exactly what it craved, absolute blind adoration. Every night, I lay awake in our dark bedroom, listening to his steady, rhythmic breathing. I stared at the ceiling, calculating the exact legal penalties for federal wire fraud and commercial forgery. I focused on the intricate web of systemic karma I was meticulously weaving around him. He thought I was simply a naive, administrative workhorse, easily manipulated and easily discarded. He genuinely believed he held all the power because he controlled the visible bank accounts. But real power does not scream for attention. Real power operates in absolute silence. I let him sleep peacefully, believing his master plan was flawlessly unfolding. He had absolutely no idea that his devoted, smiling wife had just legally purchased the very floor beneath his feet and was quietly measuring him for a permanent concrete coffin. Sunday dinners at the sprawling Connecticut estate of Beatrice Sterling were an institution I once looked forward to with genuine warmth. Her magnificent Georgian manor always smelled of roasted garlic, fresh rosemary, and expensive floral arrangements. For 7 years, I had walked through those towering mahogany doors, believing I was a cherished member of her inner circle. Beatrice was a formidable matriarch, wrapped in fine cashmere and inherited pearls. She had welcomed me with open arms when Liam and I first married, praising my strong work ethic and calling me the bright, ambitious daughter she never had. That particular Sunday afternoon, I stepped out of our luxury sedan and took a deep breath of the crisp autumn air. I adjusted the collar of my tailored silk blouse, pasting on the exact bright, confident smile I had rigorously perfected over the last few agonizing weeks. Liam wrapped his heavy arm tightly around my waist, playing the part of the incredibly devoted husband as we walked up the sweeping stone steps together. Beatrice greeted us in the grand marble foyer, kissing both of my cheeks and loudly complimenting my elegant outfit. She held my hands firmly in hers, looking deeply into my eyes with what I used to believe was pure maternal affection. The absolute sheer hypocrisy of her warm, glowing smile made my skin physically crawl, but I matched her radiant energy flawlessly. I thanked her for the lovely invitation and handed her a rare bottle of imported red wine. We moved seamlessly into the formal dining room, where the long polished oak table was meticulously set with pristine crystal glasses and antique silver cutlery. The dinner conversation flowed easily over plates of slow roasted lamb and seasonal root vegetables, covering mundane topics like country club renovations and the unpredictable stock market. Liam was proudly holding court, bragging endlessly about a massive new commercial logistics contract he was supposedly closing by the end of the month. Beatrice beamed across the table at him with pure, unadulterated pride, nodding at his every fabricated word. Halfway through the extravagant main course, I politely excused myself to use the guest restroom down the main hall. The heavy velvet curtains and thick Persian carpets completely absorbed the sound of my footsteps as I walked past the quiet, elegant sitting rooms. I stepped into the lavish guest suite to wash my hands, splashing freezing cold water on my wrists to calm my racing pulse. I dried my hands on a monogrammed linen towel and turned to leave the room when something completely out of place caught my eye. Tucked partially beneath a plush velvet accent chair near the large bay window was a small object. I walked over slowly and crouched down to retrieve it. My breath hitched sharply in my throat. It was an extremely expensive handmade wooden teething ring. The toy was crafted from smooth polished maple and featured a tiny silver bell securely attached to a thick blue satin ribbon. Liam and I had absolutely no children. Beatrice had no other grandchildren, and she rarely hosted friends with infants. There was absolutely no logical reason for a luxury baby toy to be resting on the hardwood floor of her pristine guest bedroom. My mind immediately raced back to the offshore trust fund, the fraudulent corporate loans, and the secret child. A cold, suffocating realization began to violently wash over me. The toy was not just a random, forgotten item dropped by a passing guest. It was a glaring piece of physical evidence that the secret life Liam was hiding had boldly crossed the threshold of this very house. The mistress and the child had been here. They had been welcomed into the family home while I was busy balancing the corporate ledgers at the recording studio. I slipped the wooden toy deep into the pocket of my trousers, my hands shaking with a potent mixture of explosive rage and sheer terror. I walked back down the long, dim corridor, moving as silently as a ghost. As I cautiously approached the heavy swinging doors leading into the massive chef kitchen, I heard the low, hushed voices of Liam and his mother. I stopped dead in my tracks, pressing my back flat against the cool plaster wall. I held my breath, straining to hear every single word through the slight gap in the doors. Beatrice was speaking with a sharp, commanding tone that completely lacked her usual sweet, grandmotherly warmth. She told Liam that Gillian was becoming entirely too demanding and incredibly reckless. She complained bitterly that the generous monthly allowance she was secretly sending to the girl was meant to keep her quiet and complacent in her luxury apartment, not to fund ridiculous, highly visible shopping sprees on Newbury Street. My heart stopped beating in my chest. Beatrice knew. She knew absolutely everything. Liam let out a heavy, frustrated sigh. He begged his mother to just be patient for a little while longer. He told her the offshore cash transfers were almost fully complete and that the toxic corporate loans were securely anchored under my forged signature. He confidently promised her that once the logistics company formally declared bankruptcy, they would be completely free of me. He said Gillian could finally step into the public light with his infant son, and they could start their real life together. Beatrice coldly replied that he needed to handle the divorce cleanly and quickly. She explicitly stated she could not stand pretending to love me for another tedious holiday season, and that her beautiful grandson deserved a proper, wealthy upbringing without the lingering shadow of a bitter, ruined ex-wife. The profound magnitude of the deception physically buckled my knees. I pressed a trembling hand fiercely over my mouth to stifle the agonizing sob tearing at my throat. It was not just my husband stabbing me in the back. The entire family was actively participating in my financial and emotional execution. The woman who had toasted at my wedding, the woman who had held my hand when my own mother passed away, was personally funding the young mistress who had destroyed my life. She was paying Gillian to stay hidden until Liam could successfully ruin me with millions in fraudulent corporate debt. I was completely surrounded by smiling, ruthless predators. A fresh wave of icy protective adrenaline surged through my veins. The initial paralyzing shock rapidly evaporated, leaving behind a terrifying diamond-hard rage. The seasoned forensic auditor inside me took total control of my body. I smoothed the wrinkles from my silk blouse, fixed my posture perfectly, and pasted a brilliant glowing smile back onto my face. I boldly pushed open the kitchen door, stepping directly into the bright light. Liam and Beatrice instantly stopped talking, their faces snapping toward me in sheer unguarded panic. I casually walked over to the marble island, poured myself a tall glass of sparkling water, and thanked Beatrice for such an incredibly wonderful meal. I looked directly into my mother-in-law's lying, calculating eyes and told her exactly how incredibly blessed I was to be a part of such an honest, loving family. I watched the uneasy relief wash over their faces as they believed their horrible secret was still safe, completely unaware that I was now armed with the absolute truth. The scent of Beatrice and her expensive roasted lamb still clung to my cashmere coat when I finally returned to the absolute safety of my own home that Sunday evening. The horrific truth of my mother-in-law's complete complicity was burning a massive hole straight through my chest, but I knew I could not afford to let pure, unadulterated rage dictate my timeline. Harrison, my ruthless corporate attorney, had been explicitly clear during our last intense strategy session. We desperately needed exactly 3 more weeks. I needed 3 weeks to finalize the blind corporate acquisition of the land lease sitting beneath Liam's primary logistics warehouse. I needed 3 weeks to permanently sever my legitimate hard-earned funds from his fraudulent high-interest commercial debt. The terrifying problem was that Liam and Beatrice were rapidly accelerating their own malicious timeline. I knew from listening to their hushed kitchen conversation that they were preparing to blindside me with those forged postnuptial documents and a sudden divorce filing at any given moment. I desperately needed a massive distraction. I needed to throw a giant piece of raw, bloody meat directly into the shark tank to stall their vicious, coordinated attack. Monday morning arrived with a torrential coastal downpour washing over the Boston harbor. I arrived at the commercial recording studio 3 full hours before the first scheduled vocal talent was due to walk through the heavy soundproof doors. I sat entirely alone in the pristine main control room, bathed in the soft blue glow of the mixing console, and opened my encrypted laptop. I did not log into the daily audio engineering software. Instead, I spent the next 2 hours meticulously crafting a completely fabricated but flawlessly realistic email chain. I used the official corporate digital letterhead of the massive international entertainment conglomerate that technically owned my boutique recording studio. I drafted a highly confidential internal memorandum addressed directly to me from the senior executive board of directors. The fake email outlined an incredibly aggressive corporate restructuring plan. It detailed exactly how the parent conglomerate was executing a hostile takeover of all independent subsidiary studios and effectively buying out senior management contracts. The language was dense and intimidating, filled with convincing legal terminology and standard corporate acquisition jargon. But the absolute golden hook, the exact shiny detail I knew would completely paralyze Liam and Beatrice, was buried deeply in the 3rd paragraph. The email stated that as a founding operations manager, my mandatory corporate buyout package would total exactly $2.5 million. I deliberately added a highly specific fake instruction from the Human Resources Department requiring the massive 7-figure payout to be deposited directly into a verified joint marital bank account for mandatory tax compliance purposes. The official corporate payout date was boldly listed as exactly 5 weeks away. I printed a flawless, high-resolution copy of the fake email chain, making sure the bold $2.5 million figure was practically leaping off the crisp white page. I knew exactly how Liam operated in our home. He was a creature of intense, arrogant habit. Every single evening after dinner, he would pour himself a glass of expensive imported bourbon and retreat to his home office to review his logistics manifests. He would always snoop around my desk, if I left my door open, completely convinced he was the smartest and most cunning person in our townhouse. That evening, I casually left the printed email sitting face up right on top of my open laptop keyboard in the center of my home desk. I did not attempt to hide it under a folder or tuck it away. I placed it exactly where his greedy, roaming eyes would inevitably land. I deliberately left my office door wide open, turned on the small brass desk lamp to perfectly highlight the paperwork, and went downstairs to take a long hot shower. The scalding water pelted against my skin, but my mind was entirely focused on the wooden floorboards directly above my head. I stood in the steaming shower for exactly 30 minutes, giving him more than enough uninterrupted time to take the irresistible bait. When I finally wrapped myself in a thick, heavy cotton robe and silently walked up the carpeted stairs. My heart was hammering, a frantic, wild rhythm against my ribs. I paused just outside the doorway of his home office, holding my breath and pressing my back flat against the cool hallway wall. I could hear the faint, frantic sound of Liam pacing back and forth across the hardwood floor. He was speaking in a hushed, panicked whisper on his cell phone. He was talking directly to his mother. His voice was trembling violently with a potent mixture of utter disbelief and absolute, unadulterated greed. He rapidly explained the intimate details of the corporate buyout email he had just illegally read on my desk. He breathlessly told Beatrice that I was about to receive $2.5 million in cold hard cash and that the parent conglomerate legally required it to be funneled directly into our joint marital accounts. The sudden dramatic shift in his entire sinister strategy was practically instantaneous. I heard Beatrice crackling through the phone speaker, her sharp aristocratic voice commanding him to immediately stop the divorce proceedings. She aggressively reminded him that if he served me with the forged post-nuptial agreement now and filed for his fake corporate bankruptcy, he would be legally walking away with nothing but the offshore funds he had already stolen. But if he simply played the loving, devoted husband for just one more month, he could legally lay claim to half of that massive impending corporate payout. She coldly instructed him to keep Gillian quiet. She told him to force his young mistress to hide in her luxury apartment and strictly maintain the absolute perfect illusion of our happy marriage until the imaginary cash hit our accounts. Liam eagerly and desperately agreed to his mother's greedy demands, completely abandoning his original timeline to destroy me. He promised Beatrice he would be the absolute perfect doting partner, showering me with affection and support until the millions were safely deposited. I backed away from the wall, a cold, victorious smile slowly spreading across my face. The sheer blinding arrogance of their infinite greed was their ultimate undoing. They had completely swallowed the poisoned bait without a single passing moment of hesitation or doubt. They genuinely believed they were masterfully manipulating me, extending my false sense of security just long enough to rob me of a massive corporate windfall. They had absolutely no idea that they had just willingly locked themselves inside their own burning house. They were eagerly handing me the exact precious time I needed to tighten the legal noose around their necks. The countdown clock was officially ticking, and I was now the one holding the detonator. The scent of expensive lavender and steamed silk hung heavy in the air of the exclusive Newbury Street bridal boutique. I sat gracefully on a plush velvet sofa, sipping complimentary sparkling water while the cheerful seamstress fluttered around the grand dressing room. Today was supposedly all about celebrating love and loyalty. In reality, it was a carefully orchestrated tactical extraction. I had brought Gillian here under the guise of treating my new favorite bridesmaid to a custom gown fitting. The plush boutique was a serene ocean of white tulle and sparkling mirrors, offering the absolute perfect backdrop for the darkest performance of my life. Gillian was behind the heavy velvet curtain, stepping into a ridiculously expensive emerald green silk gown I was personally paying for. I could hear her humming happily to herself, completely oblivious to the fact that I was actively hunting her. She had tossed her designer handbag carelessly onto the velvet cushion right next to me. Her latest generation smartphone rested face up on top of her purse. It was practically begging to be taken. I knew from my years managing high-stakes corporate logistics that a careless digital footprint was the easiest way to topple an empire. I had purchased a military-grade data cloning drive the size of a standard thumb drive specifically for this exact moment. The thick curtain swept open with a dramatic swish. Gillian stepped onto the circular pedestal, posing arrogantly in front of the massive three-way mirrors. The emerald silk clung tightly to her youthful frame. She ran her hands down her waist and offered a highly exaggerated sigh, looking directly at my reflection. She casually remarked that she was so incredibly relieved her body had bounced back so flawlessly. She said it was such a tragic shame how older women simply surrendered their figures once they got comfortable in a marriage. She tilted her head, giving me a sickeningly sweet smile, and added that successful men like Liam were naturally visual creatures who needed constant energetic stimulation to stay fully invested. The sheer audacity of her veiled insults would have absolutely crushed the old Claire. Instead, her arrogance served as the perfect necessary distraction. As she twirled for the seamstress, loudly complaining about the hemline being slightly too conservative, I calmly reached over and slid the small cloning drive directly into the port of her phone. The tiny device vibrated once, signaling the rapid data extraction had automatically begun. I kept my eyes locked on her reflection, offering a warm maternal smile. I completely agreed with her. I told her that youth was a precious, fleeting commodity, and that Liam certainly appreciated a woman who knew exactly how to maintain her sharpest assets. Gillian beamed, soaking up the false validation like a dry sponge. She stepped off the pedestal and walked closer to the tall mirror, adjusting the delicate silk straps. She casually mentioned that Liam frequently confided in her during their late-night corporate strategy sessions. She claimed he often expressed a deep, profound desire to be surrounded by youthful, vibrant energy. She looked right at me through the cold mirror and softly murmured that some men were just genetically wired to be energetic fathers to young, active families rather than being trapped in quiet, sterile homes. The horrific implication regarding my own painful infertility hung thick and toxic in the boutique air. She was deliberately twisting a rusty knife, trying to assert her ultimate dominance over the aging, clueless wife. My hands rested perfectly still on my lap. Beneath my calm exterior, a roaring inferno of vengeance was burning brighter than ever. I watched the tiny indicator light on the cloning drive flash rapidly in the shadows, downloading every text message, every hidden offshore banking app, every digital photo of her secret child. She was happily gloating about stealing my husband while I was quietly downloading the exact coordinates of her total financial destruction. I told her she was absolutely right. I said a brilliant man like Liam definitely needed a strong legacy to leave behind, and that I was completely thrilled he had found such a dedicated young partner to help secure his future. The cloning drive vibrated twice, indicating a successful complete extraction. I smoothly slid the wormed device out of her phone and palmed it safely deep into my coat pocket, just as the seamstress returned with a box of silver pins. Gillian turned around, doing one final dramatic spin in the expensive silk dress. She asked me if the vibrant green color was perhaps too bold for a traditional vow renewal ceremony. I stood up slowly, walking over to her, and gently adjusted a stray piece of blonde hair behind her ear. I looked deeply into her bright, greedy eyes and told her the color was absolutely perfect. I said she looked exactly like a woman who was about to get everything she truly deserved. She smiled brightly, thanking me for being so incredibly generous and welcoming. I walked to the front counter and paid the exorbitant boutique invoice without a single flinch or moment of hesitation. The physical silk dress was ridiculously expensive, but the raw encrypted data currently burning a hole in my pocket was absolutely priceless. The smiling enemy genuinely thought she had won the psychological battle today by flaunting her youth and her stolen family in my face. I opened the heavy glass door for her, playing the perfect, gracious host. I watched her walk down the bustling sidewalk, feeling a profound sense of absolute power. She strutted out of the bridal shop carrying her garment bags like shiny trophies, completely unaware that her entire digital life was now resting securely in my hands. I had just successfully captured the entire structural blueprint of her war, and I was finally ready to burn their perfectly planned future to the absolute ground. The heavy oak doors of Harrison Caldwell's office closed behind me with a solid, reassuring thud. I bypassed the plush leather guest chairs and walked directly to his massive mahogany desk, placing the small silver cloning drive right on top of his pristine legal pad. I did not say a single word. I simply met his sharp, analyzing gaze and nodded. Harrison picked up the tiny device with the absolute reverence of a bomb technician handling a live detonator. He plugged it into a standalone encrypted laptop completely isolated from the main firm network. We sat in absolute silence for 45 minutes while his specialized forensic software chewed through the massive raw data dump I had stolen from Gillian's phone at the bridal boutique. The wait was physically agonizing. My stomach churned with a toxic mixture of dread and pure electric anticipation, but I forced my posture to remain perfectly straight. When the progress bar finally flashed green, the screen flooded with the intimate digital blueprint of my husband's horrific betrayal. Harrison did not flinch as we scrolled through thousands of encrypted text messages and heavily filtered offshore banking applications. I watched my entire 7-year marriage dissolve into a series of cold, calculated logistical maneuvers. But the true golden prize, the absolute center of their entire criminal conspiracy, was buried deep inside a locked digital folder labeled Residential Escrow. Harrison opened the encrypted digital files, and the absolute sheer scale of Liam's financial recklessness finally came into blinding focus. He had not just rented a quiet apartment for his young mistress and their secret infant son. He had purchased a sprawling, massive luxury estate in the highly exclusive gated community of Weston. The purchase price was completely astronomical, far beyond the legitimate liquid capital of our logistics firm. To fund this luxurious secret sanctuary, Liam had utilized a highly aggressive private lending firm. He had taken out a predatory commercial mortgage loaded with exorbitant interest rates and a massive impending balloon payment. He had secured this toxic debt using a fragile shell company, deliberately keeping his own name off the primary public registry. He was recklessly gambling on the fake corporate studio buyout I had fabricated, completely relying on those imaginary millions to clear the massive balloon payment before the predatory lenders foreclosed on his secret family. Harrison leaned back in his heavy leather chair, steepling his fingers beneath his chin. He looked at the mortgage documents, and a slow, predatory smile crept across his weathered face. He explained that these specific private lending firms were completely devoid of morality. They thrived on buying and selling distressed high-risk debt. If a debtor showed even the slightest hint of financial instability, these firms were always incredibly eager to offload the toxic loans to third-party liquidators for a quick cash settlement. Harrison looked directly into my eyes and laid out the most brilliantly ruthless counterattack I had ever heard. We were not going to alert the authorities just yet. We were going to quietly step into the shadows and legally buy the paper on Gillian's house. The execution required absolute financial precision. Over the next 72 hours, I meticulously liquidated every single clean remaining asset I legally controlled. I completely drained my personal untouched trust fund and cashed out my independent retirement accounts, absorbing the heavy tax penalties without a single passing thought. I funneled every last available dollar into the newly established blind limited liability company Harrison had constructed specifically for my protection. My digital footprint remained entirely invisible, completely shielded behind layers of impenetrable corporate armor. Armed with a massive reservoir of untraceable cash, Harrison approached the private lending firm representing my blind company as an aggressive offshore investment group. The negotiations were remarkably swift and brutally effective. The lenders were already incredibly nervous about Liam's heavily over-leveraged shell company. They enthusiastically accepted our massive cash offer, completely eager to wash their hands of the highly toxic mortgage. I sat in a pristine glass conference room overlooking the Boston Harbor and signed the final transfer documents with a heavy gold pen. The ink flowed smoothly across the thick legal paper, forever binding their luxurious secret sanctuary directly to me. The profound shift in power was absolutely intoxicating. A cold, brilliant wave of total control washed through my entire body, instantly freezing the lingering pain of my shattered marriage. I was no longer just the betrayed, aging wife weeping over a ruined future. I was no longer the oblivious victim of a devastating financial crime. I had legally transformed into the ultimate apex predator. I was officially the sole owner of the massive mortgage securing the luxury estate where Liam slept with his young mistress. I was their absolute biggest creditor. The roof over their heads, the nursery where their secret child slept, and the very ground they walked on now belonged entirely to me. That evening, I returned to our upscale townhouse, perfectly playing the role of the exhausted but deeply devoted partner. Liam was sitting comfortably on the expensive velvet sofa, sipping his imported bourbon and casually reviewing his logistics manifests. He looked up and offered me that same flawless practice smile, telling me he had missed me all afternoon. I walked over and gently kissed his cheek, completely unfazed by the faint scent of Gillian's perfume clinging to his lapel. I asked him how his day was, smoothly pouring myself a glass of sparkling water. He proudly boasted about his clever corporate negotiations, completely convinced he was a brilliant financial mastermind, orchestrating my ultimate downfall. I sat across from him, nodding affectionately and praising his incredible work ethic. My heart did not race, and my hands did not shake. The agonizing psychological tension that used to consume me had completely vanished. I looked at the handsome man I had loved for 7 years and felt absolutely nothing but a cold clinical detachment. He thought he was masterfully stringing me along patiently, waiting to steal my imaginary studio buyout. He genuinely believed he had perfectly secured a golden, luxurious future for his new secret family. He had absolutely no idea that I held the deed to his entire secret world locked safely inside my purse. The heavy dominoes of systemic karma were completely set in place, and I was simply waiting for the absolute perfect moment to push the very first one over. The tranquility of a crisp Sunday morning wrapped around our Boston townhouse like a deceptive blanket. The smell of freshly ground espresso filled the air, contrasting violently with the digital warfare I was conducting at the dining room table. The morning sun cast a bright glare across the polished mahogany, illuminating my laptop. I was meticulously reviewing the transaction statements for our primary joint checking account. Over the past 48 hours, I had noticed an aggressive drain on the available balance. Nearly $30,000 had vanished in untraceable wire transfers. I knew exactly where the money was going. It was flowing straight into his offshore trust to cover legal fees and emergency nursery renovations for his secret child. I heard the rhythmic thud of Liam walking down the hallway. I deliberately kept the banking portal open, waiting patiently for him to step directly into the trap. He strolled casually into the room, wearing his tailored athletic wear, looking every inch like a successful executive, enjoying a peaceful morning. He walked quietly behind my chair and glanced over my shoulder. I felt his muscular frame stiffen as his eyes locked onto the red numbers displayed on the screen. The drop in our account balance was glaringly obvious. Before I could even ask a question, Liam immediately launched into a theatrical performance of righteous indignation mixed with deeply wounded pride. He let out a dramatic sigh and aggressively crossed his arms over his chest. He demanded to know why I was relentlessly snooping through our daily operational funds on a weekend. He forcefully asserted that he managed the corporate finances specifically to spare me the crushing stress of accounting. I looked up at him, widening my eyes and forcing a fragile, fearful tremor into my voice. I softly pointed out the missing $30,000, expressing pure innocent concern that perhaps our accounts had been compromised by a fraudulent vendor. Liam did not miss a single beat. He knelt gracefully beside my chair, taking my trembling hands in his warm palms, and offered a beautifully crafted, breathtaking lie. He told me I had completely ruined a massive romantic surprise. He confidently claimed the missing funds were a non-refundable deposit for a spectacular secret getaway he had booked for our upcoming vow renewal. He spun a lavish, detailed tale about a private, secluded villa in the Maldives, complete with chartered seaplanes and exclusive diamond gifts. He looked deeply into my eyes, shaking his head with faked, overwhelming disappointment. He boldly accused me of lacking blind faith in his ability to provide for our family. It was a flawless execution of psychological manipulation. The old Claire would have immediately crumbled under the heavy, suffocating weight of his manufactured disappointment. I would have tearfully apologized for ruining his thoughtful surprise and begged for his absolute forgiveness. But the woman sitting in that chair was no longer his naive administrative workhorse. I was an apex predator, actively bleeding my prey dry. I instantly buried my towering, explosive rage beneath a thick blanket of sugary, sweet devotion. I let a single perfectly timed tear roll slowly down my cheek and threw my arms tightly around his neck. I held him close, whispering profound, desperate apologies into his expensive designer cologne. I told him I was incredibly sorry for doubting his grand romantic vision and that he was the most generous, loving husband a woman could ever ask to have. Liam practically purred with arrogant satisfaction. He stroked my hair gently, kissing the top of my head, and magnanimously accepted my tearful apology. He smoothly told me to close the banking portal and focus my energy on finding the perfect designer dress for our romantic ceremony. He genuinely believed he had masterfully defused a dangerous marital landmine. He thought his brilliant gaslighting had successfully blinded me to the glaring reality of his massive financial theft. He confidently walked out of the dining room, heading toward his home gym, completely oblivious to the fact that I was actively pulling the very last threads of his legitimate wealth. The absolute second he disappeared down the hallway, my fragile expression vanished entirely. My face hardened into a cold, emotionless mask of pure calculation. I quickly minimized the joint banking portal and opened a highly secured encrypted trading platform. While Liam thought he was draining our shared checking account to secure his hidden offshore paradise, I was methodically dismantling his entire corporate portfolio. Harrison, my ruthless corporate attorney, had explicitly instructed me to target the specific high-yield municipal bonds and blue-chip stocks Liam kept parked in a secondary private brokerage account. Because I had originally built the complex corporate architecture for his entire logistics firm, my administrative credentials granted me total unrestricted access to the trading platform. I initiated a rapid series of aggressive sell orders. My fingers flew across the keyboard, converting hundreds of thousands of dollars of his prized stocks into pure liquid cash. The advanced algorithms processed the massive transactions within mere seconds. I immediately routed the newly liquidated funds through a secure digital tunnel directly into the blind limited liability company Harrison had constructed for my protection. Liam was absolutely convinced he was playing an incredible game of high-stakes chess, manipulating the board to leave me with an empty company and a mountain of fraudulent debt. He thought his fabricated story about a luxury vacation would keep me completely manageable until he finally chose to drop the hammer. But the intoxicating reality was that the massive chessboard belonged entirely to me. I was deliberately letting him steal the loose change from our checking account so he would never look closely at the major structural supports holding up his financial empire. By the time he finished his morning workout, I had successfully severed his absolute last legitimate financial lifeline. Every single clean dollar he owned was now safely locked inside my invisible corporate vault. He was officially a dead man walking through a kingdom he no longer owned, and I was simply waiting to show him the ashes of his ruined life. The heavy mahogany clock in Harrison Caldwell's office was ticking with a slow, rhythmic precision that perfectly matched the steady beating of my own heart. I was sitting across from my formidable attorney, listening intently as he delivered a piece of intelligence that would have absolutely crushed an ordinary woman. Harrison steepled his fingers, resting his elbows on his pristine glass desk, and told me that Liam had officially made his fatal move. My husband had secretly filed the fabricated post-nuptial agreement with the county court. He had paid an exorbitant premium to a corrupt clerk to quietly expedite the legal processing, completely bypassing the standard mandatory waiting periods. Harrison slid a highly confidential court docket printout across the desk. The sheer audacity of the betrayal was laid bare in cold black ink. Liam was not simply planning to divorce me. He was engineering a spectacular public execution. Harrison explained that Liam had hired a premier private legal courier service to deliver the final stamped dissolution papers directly to our lavish vow renewal ceremony. His malicious intent was completely transparent and unimaginably cruel. He intended to stand before our family and friends, recite his beautiful fabricated vows, and slice our wedding cake. Then, immediately following the champagne toast, he planned to blindside me with the legal documents. He wanted to shatter my entire world in front of an audience, completely humiliating me while securing his fake corporate bankruptcy and running off to his secret family. He genuinely believed he had crafted a flawless, inescapable trap. I looked down at the court printout and felt absolutely no urge to cry. The lingering pain of my shattered marriage had been entirely replaced by a terrifying diamond-hard clarity. I was an apex predator, armed with the ultimate power of silent wealth, and I was finally ready to strike. I looked up at Harrison and calmly told him it was time to prepare our own specialized delivery. For the next 3 hours, we sat in his secure office, drafting the most devastating legal counterattack in corporate history. We did not merely outline a standard divorce petition. We engineered absolute financial annihilation based strictly on the undeniable laws of systemic karma. Harrison meticulously compiled the official foreclosure notices for the massive luxury estate where Gillian and her secret infant resided. Since my blind limited liability company now legally owned the predatory mortgage securing that property, I had the absolute right to demand immediate total repayment. We drafted emergency asset seizure orders, targeting every single dollar Liam had attempted to hide in his offshore trusts. We included the massive unassailable proof of his fraudulent commercial loans and his blatant corporate embezzlement. We bundled these catastrophic documents into a thick, heavy stack of crisp white legal paper. This was not a negotiation. It was a permanent concrete burial. By Friday afternoon, the sprawling botanical gardens we had rented for the vow renewal ceremony were a hive of frantic, glamorous activity. I walked through the grand crystal conservatory, playing the absolute perfect role of the blissful, oblivious bride. I wore a tailored ivory pantsuit and carried a clipboard cheerfully directing the premium florists as they arranged thousands of imported white orchids. I smiled warmly at the busy caterers setting up the massive champagne towers, completely masking the cold, ruthless calculation running through my mind. I was not there to manage the floral arrangements. I was actively standing guard, waiting for Liam's private legal courier to arrive. Right on schedule, a tall, athletic man wearing a sharp grey suit and a discreet security earpiece walked into the main conservatory foyer. He carried a thick, heavily sealed manila envelope bearing the premium logo of a highly exclusive process-serving firm. I watched him approach the main reception desk, asking the venue manager for Liam. I stepped forward immediately, pasting a bright, welcoming smile onto my face and gracefully intercepting him before the manager could even respond. I introduced myself as the bride and the primary event coordinator, casually explaining that my husband was currently tied up in emergency corporate meetings and would not arrive until the evening rehearsal. The courier hesitated, instinctively clutching the sealed envelope tighter. He stated that the package was highly confidential and required an authorized signature. I softly laughed, waving my hand dismissively, and told him I handled all of my husband's sensitive corporate logistics. I produced my official state identification and offered my most charming, persuasive smile, smoothly assuring him that Liam had explicitly asked me to secure the documents in the private bridal safe until he arrived. The courier, evaluating my confident, relaxed demeanor and my verifiable identification, finally relented. He handed me his digital tablet. I signed my name with a steady, flawless flourish and took possession of the heavy manila envelope. The moment the courier walked out the glass doors, I turned and walked directly into the secluded private bridal suite. I locked the heavy oak door behind me and drew the thick velvet curtains. I placed Liam's sealed envelope on the marble vanity and carefully sliced it open with a silver letter opener. I pulled out the court-stamped documents and read the fabricated post-nuptial agreement. It was a masterpiece of absolute greed, stripping me of my home, my investments, and my fundamental dignity. I felt a brief, hot flash of disgust, but I quickly shoved his forged paperwork deep into my leather tote bag. I reached into my bag and pulled out the thick stack of devastating legal documents Harrison had prepared. I slid the foreclosure notices, the asset freezes, and the corporate fraud indictments into the premium courier envelope. I meticulously resealed the flap using a specialized adhesive, ensuring it looked completely undisturbed and perfectly authentic. I held the heavy package in my hands, feeling the immense, terrifying weight of absolute systemic justice. I unlocked the bridal suite door and walked back out into the bustling conservatory. I handed the resealed envelope directly to the senior venue manager with a bright, innocent smile. I gave her highly specific, strict instructions. I told her that my husband had arranged a very special romantic surprise for me and that she must personally hand this exact envelope to Liam immediately after the final champagne toast tomorrow night. I watched the manager carefully lock the package inside the secure venue safe, completely unaware of the radioactive bomb she was holding. Liam had arrogantly forged a weapon designed to destroy my entire life and blindside me in front of the world. He thought he was a brilliant, untouchable mastermind. He had absolutely no idea that I had just quietly taken his loaded weapon, turned it completely around, and aimed it directly at his own chest. The morning sun pierced through the heavy silk drapes of our master bedroom, casting long golden shadows across the pristine hardwood floor. It was exactly 6 o'clock on the morning of our highly anticipated 7th anniversary vow renewal. I lay perfectly still in the center of the massive, king-sized bed, listening to the distant muffled sounds of the city slowly waking up. 7 years ago, on my actual wedding day, I had woken up in a state of nervous, ecstatic joy, completely blinded by the overwhelming illusion of true love. Today, my heart beat with a slow, heavy, and terrifyingly calm rhythm. I stared at the intricate plaster molding on the ceiling, feeling absolutely no wedding day jitters. I felt only the cold, metallic certainty of a seasoned forensic auditor preparing to close the most important ledger of her entire life. The brass handle on the bedroom door clicked softly, turning my attention away from the ceiling. Liam walked into the room carrying a heavy silver tray, laden with fresh pastries and steaming imported coffee. He was wearing his plush monogrammed bathrobe, looking every inch the ruggedly handsome and entirely devoted partner. A bright, boyish smile was plastered across his face as he carefully set the heavy tray down on the plush mattress beside me. He leaned over, brushing a stray lock of hair from my forehead, and pressed a warm, lingering kiss against my cheek. He looked deeply into my eyes and whispered that today was going to be the most magical, spectacular day of our entire lives. He told me he wanted to spoil me this morning because I deserved the absolute world for standing by his side through all the stress of his corporate logistics firm. My stomach violently convulsed at the sheer sickening magnitude of his hypocrisy. The physical proximity of his body, the faint lingering scent of his expensive cologne, and the warm weight of his hand on mine made my skin crawl with pure, unadulterated revulsion. I knew with absolute certainty that this man was planning to publicly humiliate me and serve me with forged divorce papers, the very second the champagne flutes were emptied tonight. He genuinely believed he was about to secure his fake corporate bankruptcy and walk away into a luxurious sunset with Gillian and his secret infant son. But the new version of Claire, the woman who had meticulously drained his legitimate accounts and purchased the predatory mortgage on his secret estate, simply smiled. I forced my facial muscles into an expression of radiant, blushing adoration. I reached out and gently squeezed his hand, thanking him for being so incredibly thoughtful and romantic. I fed his massive, insatiable ego exactly the blind admiration it craved, watching him soak up my fake devotion like a dry sponge. Liam beamed with arrogant satisfaction, completely convinced his psychological manipulation was flawlessly intact. He kissed my forehead one final time and confidently announced he was heading down to his private study to review a few minor shipping manifests before getting dressed. He told me to take my time enjoying the luxurious breakfast and to focus entirely on looking beautiful for our guests. The second the heavy bedroom door clicked shut behind him, my fragile, loving smile instantly vanished into thin air. I pushed the silver tray aside completely, ignoring the expensive pastries and the hot coffee. I threw off the heavy duvet and walked directly into my expansive walk-in closet. Hanging perfectly in the center of the room, illuminated by the soft recessed lighting, was my vow renewal gown. It was a breathtaking custom masterpiece, crafted from yards of heavy ivory silk and intricate vintage French lace. I ran my fingertips slowly down the exquisite fabric, feeling the cold, smooth texture beneath my hands. The woman who had originally ordered this dress months ago had been a foolish, naive workhorse. She had spent years exhausting herself at the recording studio managing complex corporate acquisitions for the parent conglomerate, while her husband secretly built a fraudulent empire behind her back. That woman would have slipped into this gown feeling like a cherished queen. I stepped into the heavy silk structure, feeling a profoundly different sensation entirely. As I pulled the delicate lace sleeves up my arms and reached behind my back to slowly slide the hidden zipper into place, I did not feel like a blushing bride, preparing to celebrate a milestone of enduring love. The heavy ivory silk felt exactly like a custom-fitted suit of tactical armor. Every single layer of tulle and satin added another physical barrier between my raw, battered heart and the treacherous world outside. I turned to face the towering three-way mirrors, completely analyzing my reflection with ruthless clinical detachment. My posture was incredibly straight and my shoulders were pulled back with rigid, unyielding confidence. The soft romantic waves of my hair and the subtle elegant makeup completely masked the lethal corporate assassin standing silently beneath the surface. I stared deeply into my own dark eyes, mentally reviewing every single brutal step of the master plan Harrison and I had engineered. The blind limited liability company was fully secured. The massive high-interest commercial debt was officially owned by me. The massive payout trap involving the fake studio acquisition had been completely swallowed by both Liam and Beatrice. And the most devastating weapon of all, the heavy manila envelope containing the immediate foreclosure notices and the corporate fraud indictments, was sitting quietly inside the locked safe at the Botanical Gardens, waiting to be handed directly to my husband. I slid my feet into a pair of towering designer heels, feeling the sharp elevation physically alter my stance. I grabbed my diamond earrings from the velvet jewelry box, fastening them securely to my earlobes. Liam and his greedy mother thought they were going to spend this beautiful autumn evening watching me crumble into a weeping, broken mess in front of Boston polite society. They thought they had masterfully cornered a weak, defenseless woman. I took one final deep breath, filling my lungs with the quiet stillness of the empty closet. I was fully armed, completely shielded, and absolutely ready for total war. I walked out of the dressing room, my heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor, echoing through the silent house like the heavy, relentless ticking of a rapidly expiring clock. I was not walking down an aisle today. I was marching directly onto a battlefield, and I fully intended to be the only person left standing when the absolute final curtain fell. The rolling green hills of the Brookline Country Club were bathed in the fading amber light of a brisk autumn evening. Luxury vehicles lined the sweeping circular driveway, where uniformed valet attendants hurried to open doors for the absolute elite of Boston society. I stood just inside the grand ballroom entrance, breathing in the heavy, intoxicating scent of imported white lilies and expensive bespoke perfumes. A talented string quartet played softly in the corner, masking the low hum of wealthy executives and high society matriarchs mingling over crystal flutes of vintage champagne. It was a flawless picture of affluent domestic success, perfectly curated to celebrate my enduring marriage to Liam. Yet beneath the glittering, polished surface of this magnificent celebration, a toxic, deadly current of deception was actively buzzing through the room. Liam was entirely in his element. He stood near a towering swan eye sculpture, wearing a custom-tailored black tuxedo, looking ridiculously handsome and thoroughly arrogant. He was loudly holding court with a tight circle of senior logistics partners and international shipping investors. I watched him smoothly shake hands and confidently pat backs, feeding them absolute lies about his upcoming corporate expansions. He genuinely believed he was the smartest man in the room, masterfully manipulating both his wealthy investors and his supposedly naive wife. He had absolutely no idea that I had spent the last 3 weeks meticulously acquiring the very land his primary warehouses sat on. I glided gracefully toward his group, offering the older investors a warm, radiant smile. I shook their hands graciously, playing the role of the supportive, silent partner, while internally calculating the exact moment their entire supply chain would legally collapse under my new management. Across the sprawling room, Beatrice was completely surrounded by her wealthy country club contemporaries. She wore a stunning sapphire gown dripping in heavy heirloom diamonds, perfectly playing the role of the immensely proud mother. I watched her elegantly raise her glass to toast her brilliant son and his beautiful, devoted wife, drawing cheerful laughter from her wealthy friends. Every single time our eyes met across the crowded room, she offered me a dazzling, affectionate smile that completely lacked genuine warmth. It was a masterclass in high society warfare. She firmly believed she was actively stringing me along, keeping me calm and docile until Liam could successfully siphon my imaginary corporate buyout package. I simply smiled back at her, raising my own glass of sparkling water in a silent, mocking tribute to her absolute foolishness. But the true suffocating tension of the evening radiated from the far end of the grand ballroom near the sprawling floral archway serving as our renewal altar. Gillian was standing there, wearing the vibrant emerald green silk dress I had personally purchased for her just a few days prior. She looked breathtakingly youthful, and entirely out of place among the conservative Boston elite. Beside her feet, resting in the shadow of a massive floral arrangement, was a sleek, modern luxury stroller. She was casually bouncing her foot, rocking the carriage back and forth, keeping the secret infant fast asleep amidst the roaring party. The sheer brazen audacity of bringing my husband's illegitimate child to my own vow renewal ceremony was physically staggering. It was the ultimate insult wrapped in expensive green silk. I watched Gillian closely as she mingled with the other younger bridesmaids. Every few minutes, her eyes would dart across the room seeking out Liam. Whenever he glanced in her direction, she would flash him a wicked, victorious smirk. It was a secret, disgusting language of shared betrayal, passing silently over the heads of 200 oblivious guests. She thought she was the ultimate winner in this high-stakes game, completely confident that she was simply waiting out the clock until she could permanently replace me. She proudly adjusted the thin straps of her green dress, completely unaware that the military-grade cloning drive had entirely drained her digital life. She had absolutely no idea that I currently possessed every single legal document exposing her hidden luxury estate and her fraudulent banking activities. I was quietly paying for her dress while holding the match to burn down her house. I floated through the crowd like a serene, untouchable ghost. I gracefully accepted warm hugs from distant relatives and polite kisses from corporate wives who constantly told me how incredibly lucky I was to have such a devoted man. I thanked them sincerely, expressing my deep, profound gratitude for their attendance. My heart did not race. My palms did not sweat. The agonizing emotional turmoil that had plagued me for months was completely gone, entirely replaced by the cold, hard armor of absolute certainty. I was a seasoned forensic auditor standing inside a room full of arrogant criminals who had willingly handed me the keys to their own prisons. I engaged in small talk about the crisp autumn weather and the beautiful floral arrangements absorbing their compliments with flawless grace. I briefly caught the eye of the senior venue manager standing discreetly near the grand ballroom exit. She gave me a tiny, almost imperceptible nod, confirming that the heavy sealed envelope was secured and ready for its grand presentation. The envelope containing the immediate foreclosure notices, the frozen asset declarations, and the unassailable proof of corporate fraud was waiting quietly in the dark. It was the ultimate weapon Liam had forged against me, meticulously reversed and aimed directly at his own chest. The absolute worst day of his life was resting safely inside a steel box, just waiting for my command. The string quartet seamlessly shifted their melody, playing the traditional classical piece designated for the ceremony to begin. The loud, joyful chatter of the guests slowly faded into an expectant hush as everyone began to take their seats facing the beautiful floral archway. Liam broke away from his investors, striding confidently toward me with that bright, devastatingly handsome smile. He offered me his arm, his dark eyes shining with pure manipulative greed. He thought he was walking me toward my ultimate destruction. I looked up at him, smiling with the serene, terrifying calm of a woman who knew exactly how the story was going to end. I slipped my arm through his, feeling the rough texture of his tuxedo sleeve. The social tension in the room was absolute suffocating perfection. The gathering storm was finally breaking, and I was the only person in the entire country club holding an umbrella. The golden hour sunlight faded into a deep velvety twilight as the heavy brass doors of the conservatory swung open. A hushed, reverent silence fell over the 200 guests, seated in perfectly aligned rows of white wooden chairs. The delicate notes of a live string quartet drifted through the fragrant, humid air, playing a hauntingly beautiful classical melody. I walked slowly down the long aisle, covered in a thick carpet of imported white rose petals. Every single eye in that massive glass room was fixed directly on me. I saw the wealthy logistics investors, the calculating corporate partners, and the high society matriarchs watching my every step. They saw a radiant, devoted wife renewing her sacred vows to a brilliant, successful man. They had absolutely no idea they were simply the captive audience for a spectacular impending execution. Liam was waiting for me at the end of the aisle, beneath a towering archway woven with cascading green vines and heavy white blossoms. He looked like something out of a cinematic masterpiece, His tailored tuxedo fit his broad shoulders flawlessly, and his dark hair was perfectly styled. As I approached him, he reached out and gently took my hands in his. His palms were warm, and his grip was incredibly firm, projecting the absolute perfect image of a deeply loving protector. He offered me a tender, breathtaking smile that completely masked the toxic, treacherous rot festering inside his heart. I stepped onto the slightly elevated marble platform, taking my designated place opposite the man who had secretly plotted to destroy my entire existence. Out of the corner of my eye, I spotted Gillian. She was standing confidently in the front row, radiating youthful arrogance in the bright emerald green silk dress I had personally paid for. She was swaying back and forth, keeping the luxury baby stroller still beside her feet. When my eyes met hers, she flashed me a sharp, venomous smirk. It was a look of pure, unadulterated triumph. She genuinely believed she was standing on the precipice of victory, merely indulging this tedious traditional charade until Liam could legally discard me. I offered her a serene, empty smile, looking back toward my husband. The hired officiant spoke a few brief words about the enduring, profound nature of marital commitment before gesturing gracefully toward Liam. My husband slowly turned to fully face the gathered crowd, making sure every single wealthy investor and vital corporate partner had a clear, unobstructed view of his handsome face. He cleared his throat, adopting a tone of deep, overwhelming emotion. He began to speak, and the magnitude of his fabricated sincerity made the air in my lungs turn to solid ice. He told the captivated audience that 7 years ago he had married his best friend. He spoke passionately about my unwavering loyalty and my endless quiet sacrifices. He dramatically raised his voice so his business partners could hear every syllable, praising me for being the absolute bedrock of his logistics empire. He shamelessly fabricated heartwarming stories about my tireless dedication, claiming that his massive corporate success would have been impossible without my loving support behind the scenes. He paused perfectly, letting a manufactured tear gather in the corner of his eye. I stood frozen, listening to the man I once adored spin a web of sickeningly sweet lies. He told the crowd that a true partnership is tested in the dark, quiet moments of struggle, and that I had never once wavered in my profound devotion to our family. The wealthy women sitting in the front rows were reaching into their expensive handbags for tissues. The older corporate executives were nodding with solemn, deep respect, buying into his masterful performance. He was using my genuine past sacrifices as cheap theatrical props to elevate his own public image. He was painting himself as the ultimate devoted family man, right before he planned to publicly butcher me with a fraudulent post-nuptial agreement. He looked deeply into my eyes, his voice dropping to a soft, intimate whisper that amplified flawlessly across the silent room. He promised to spend the rest of his life honoring my loyalty. He swore to protect my heart, to cherish our shared history, and to build a bright, luxurious future worthy of my patience. The staggering weight of his deception was nauseating. He was reciting these beautiful poetic vows while knowing he had hired a legal courier to deliver my financial death warrant the second this ceremony concluded. I did not flinch. I did not pull my hands away from his warm, treacherous grip. I maintained a flawless expression of emotional gratitude, letting a single tear slide carefully down my cheek. I was feeding him the validation his massive, bloated ego desperately required. I wanted him to feel invincible. I wanted him to stand on the highest peak of his fabricated mountain so the impending fall would shatter every single bone in his corporate body. I nodded, absorbing his toxic words, allowing him to dig his own public grave deeper with every lie he proudly delivered to the crowd. As Liam concluded his speech, the guests erupted into enthusiastic applause. I glanced slightly to my left. Beatrice was sitting elegantly in the front row, dabbing her eyes with a lace handkerchief, mesmerized by her son's brilliant, deceptive performance. Just a few feet away, Gillian glowed with arrogant anticipation. She subtly adjusted the neckline of her emerald gown, ready to step into the spotlight the moment Liam destroyed me. They were all so incredibly confident. They were drunk on their own perceived brilliance. I squeezed Liam's hand, smiling up at him with the cold, calculated precision of a woman holding a loaded gun. The vows were entirely fake, but the systemic karma silently waiting inside the venue safe was absolutely real. The trap was fully set. The audience was perfectly primed, and the storm was finally ready to break. The thunderous applause following Liam's magnificent performance eventually rolled to a gentle stop. The elegant venue manager stepped forward and handed me the sleek silver microphone. The metal was cool against my palm, instantly grounding my racing thoughts. I stood at the floral altar bathed in the warm amber glow of the conservatory lighting. 200 of Boston's wealthiest elites leaned forward in their pristine white chairs, completely captivated. They were fully expecting a weeping, devoted wife to pour her heart out in a display of endless pathetic gratitude. I looked down at the microphone and took a slow, deep breath. I let the silence stretch out over the room for 5 agonizing seconds. I wanted them to feel the gravity of this moment. I wanted every single eye locked directly on me before I shattered the glass house Liam had built. I raised the microphone to my lips. My voice echoed through the massive room, completely steady and devoid of any fragile emotion. I began by thanking my husband. I told him his words were absolutely unforgettable and that they perfectly encapsulated the true nature of our marriage. I spoke slowly, enunciating every single syllable with crystal clear precision. I looked directly into his handsome, arrogant face and thanked him for showing everyone here exactly who he was. Liam smiled back at me, his chest puffed out with victorious pride. He thought my words were a testament to his wonderful character. He was utterly blind to the lethal double meaning woven into my speech. I turned my gaze away from Liam and addressed the sea of expectant faces. I told the distinguished guests that Liam had spoken eloquently about our partnership and the complex logistics of building an empire. I explained that a true partnership leaves a permanent, undeniable paper trail. I wanted to honor that legacy tonight. I told the crowd that instead of simply speaking my vows, I had prepared a special visual presentation to document the monumental sacrifices and the hidden truths of our 7 years together. A soft murmur of pleasant surprise rippled through the audience. Beatrice clapped her hands together in delight, nudging the wealthy socialite sitting next to her. Gillian rolled her eyes in the front row, crossing her arms defensively. She clearly anticipated a boring, pathetic slideshow of our vacations and wedding memories. I kept my expression perfectly serene as I looked toward the back of the grand ballroom. High above the entrance, in the elevated audiovisual booth, sat a technician I had personally hired and vetted weeks ago. I gave him a single sharp nod. The romantic amber lighting immediately darkened, plunging the audience into a sudden dramatic shadow. The string quartet abruptly stopped playing. The sudden heavy silence in the room was palpable. Behind the magnificent floral altar, the 2 massive digital projection screens suddenly flared to life. The brilliant white light illuminated the shocked faces of the front row. The screens did not display a heartwarming montage of our romantic honeymoon in Paris. Instead, they projected crystal-clear, high-resolution scans of highly confidential corporate documents. The sheer scale of the images made them impossible to ignore. On the left screen was the complete offshore trust agreement, explicitly naming Liam as the sole beneficiary of millions of diverted corporate funds. On the right screen was the massive fraudulent commercial loan application featuring my blatantly forged signature, blown up to 10 feet tall. A wave of profound confusion washed over the audience. The senior logistics partners and international shipping investors squinted at the massive screens, their professional instincts immediately recognizing the severe legal implications of the documents. Liam physically recoiled, taking a sharp step backward. His charming, confident smile completely evaporated, instantly replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated panic. He opened his mouth to speak, but absolutely no sound came out. He was completely paralyzed, staring at the undeniable proof of his corporate embezzlement being broadcast to his most vital financial backers. Before anyone could fully process the catastrophic financial revelations, I gave the AV booth a second nod. The corporate documents vanished. The massive screens went completely black for exactly 2 seconds. Then a final image flashed onto the displays, burning into the retinas of every single person in the room. It was a flawless high-definition screenshot of a private text message thread. The sender was clearly identified as Gillian. The recipient was clearly identified as my husband. In the center of the screen, glowing in massive, undeniable white letters, was a single devastating message. The baby has your eyes. The transition from polite confusion to absolute horror was instantaneous. The entire grand ballroom descended into a suffocating, deathly silence. It was not a quiet room. It was a vacuum where all oxygen had been violently sucked away. No one breathed. No one moved. The elite investors sat frozen in their chairs, staring at the screens in pure shock. Then the silence was shattered by a sharp, piercing sound. Beatrice had dropped her vintage crystal champagne flute. It hit the hardwood floor, shattering into 1,000 glittering pieces. I slowly lowered the microphone, holding my head incredibly high. I looked directly at Gillian. She was trembling violently, her face drained of all color, her emerald green dress suddenly looking like a garish costume. She grabbed the handle of the luxury stroller, instinctively pulling it backward as the horrified stares of 200 people locked onto her. Then I turned my gaze back to Liam. The man who had planned to publicly execute me was standing perfectly still, entirely exposed, and absolutely ruined. The brilliant, untouchable mastermind was choking on his own ashes, and I had never felt more powerful in my entire life. The deafening silence hanging over the Grand Botanical Conservatory was thick enough to choke on. 200 of Boston's most influential power brokers, wealthy socialites, and formidable logistics magnates sat perfectly paralyzed. Their eyes darted from the massive digital projection of that damning text message directly to my face. I stood at the center of the floral altar, the heavy silver microphone resting comfortably in my hand. I did not shed a single tear. I did not raise my voice or show even a fraction of the hysterical grief a typical betrayed wife might exhibit. I was completely tethered to a cold, unyielding composure. The heavy ivory silk of my custom gown felt like impenetrable armor, shielding me from the radioactive fallout I had just unleashed upon the room. I brought the microphone back to my lips. My voice echoed through the sprawling glass structure, dropping an octave into a smooth, commanding cadence. I looked out over the sea of horrified faces and began to speak with absolute clinical precision. I thanked the esteemed guests for gathering to celebrate what they believed was a testament to enduring love and corporate stability. I told them that the man standing beside me had built an absolute illusion. I pointed toward the darkened screens behind me, explaining that the documents they had just witnessed were not a mistake or a cruel prank. They were the meticulously verified financial records of Liam entirely dismantling his own logistics empire. I watched the senior investors stiffen in their pristine wooden chairs. I detailed exactly how Liam had systematically drained millions of dollars from the primary operating accounts over the past 18 months. I explained his elaborate scheme to funnel those stolen assets into a labyrinth of hidden offshore trusts while simultaneously taking out massive, fraudulent commercial loans. I made sure every single corporate partner in the room understood that Liam had deliberately forged my signature on those high-interest debt agreements. He had fully intended to push the parent conglomerate into a fabricated bankruptcy, leaving me completely saddled with his staggering financial crimes while he vanished into a luxurious early retirement. The realization swept through the crowd like a freezing winter wind. I saw wealthy executives instinctively reaching for their cell phones, likely preparing to call their legal teams and freeze their investments. I was delivering pure, undeniable systemic karma, meticulously wrapping the rope around his neck and handing the ends directly to his furious financial backers. Liam finally snapped out of his stunned paralysis. The devastating reality of his public execution crashed down on him, shattering his handsome, perfectly curated facade into a million jagged pieces. His face turned a deep mottled shade of crimson, and the veins in his neck visibly bulged against his starched white collar. He lunged across the marble platform, his expensive black leather shoes slipping slightly on the scattered white rose petals. He reached out aggressively, attempting to rip the silver microphone from my hand. I simply took one deliberate step backward, entirely evading his desperate grasp. I looked at him with an expression of profound clinical disgust. He stumbled, catching his balance, and immediately began shouting over my amplified voice. He frantically waved his arms at the horrified audience, desperately claiming that I had suffered a catastrophic mental breakdown. He shouted that the digital projections were elaborate fabrications orchestrated by a hysterical, jealous woman. He begged his investors not to listen, sweating profusely under the warm amber lighting. He looked absolutely pathetic, a cornered animal screaming into a void that no longer believed a single word he said. I did not engage with his frantic shouting. I simply raised my free hand, gesturing calmly toward the front row of the audience. The heavy silence instantly swallowed Liam's desperate lies as 200 pairs of eyes followed my direction. I pointed directly at Gillian. She was standing frozen in her vibrant emerald green bridesmaid dress, the luxury baby stroller parked silently at her feet. The arrogant, victorious smirk she had worn all evening had been completely eradicated. Her face was ashen, and her eyes were wide with pure, unadulterated terror. I spoke directly into the microphone, my voice slicing through the heavy, humid air like a newly sharpened blade. I introduced Gillian to the elite Boston society, not as a supportive friend or a humble administrative assistant. I introduced her as the willing, active accomplice to massive corporate fraud. I explicitly detailed how she had helped funnel the embezzled company funds into the luxury estate where she currently resided. And then, with the same cold, steady precision, I introduced her as the mother of my husband's hidden infant son. The collective gasp from the audience was absolutely deafening. The sheer scandalous magnitude of the betrayal echoed off the soaring glass walls of the conservatory. Gillian physically recoiled, as if she had been struck by an invisible physical force. The wealthy socialites standing near her immediately stepped away, pulling their designer gowns back to avoid touching her. It was a brutal, instantaneous social excommunication. She was no longer the clever young mistress waiting to inherit a kingdom. She was entirely exposed as a criminal parasite standing in the harsh, unforgiving light of public judgment. She gripped the handle of the stroller, her knuckles turning completely white, desperately looking toward Liam for salvation. But Liam could not save her. He could not even save himself. He was frantically looking around the room, searching for a single sympathetic face among his peers, his mother and his investors. Beatrice remained slumped in her chair, clutching her chest with a look of absolute horror, realizing her son had just detonated their entire prestigious legacy. The elite crowd glared back at Liam with naked fury and profound contempt. The silent wealth and unspoken authority of the room had collectively turned against him, forming an inescapable wall of legal and social ruin. I stood perfectly still, wrapped in my white lace armor, watching the glorious, meticulous destruction of a man who had foolishly thought he could conquer the world with lies. The paralyzing silence gripping the grand conservatory was shattered by a frantic noise. Beatrice pushed out of her front row seat with such violent force that her heavy wooden chair tipped backward and crashed onto the polished floor. The elegant sapphire gown she wore seemed to swallow her small frame as she marched furiously toward the floral altar. Her face was contorted into an ugly mask of rage, and her perfectly coiffed hair trembled with every heavy step. She completely ignored the horrified stares of her wealthy peers and aimed her venom entirely at me. She pointed a shaking, diamond-encrusted finger directly at my face and unleashed a shrill, hysterical scream. She accused me of being a bitter, vindictive liar who had deliberately orchestrated this vulgar spectacle just to destroy the pristine Caldwell family name. She shrieked that I was an ungrateful outsider who had ruined their flawless reputation out of pure, petty jealousy. I stood my ground on the marble platform, completely unbothered by her theatrical outburst. I did not raise my voice or lower my gaze. I looked down at her flushed, furious face and felt a profound sense of pity mixed with absolute disgust. I spoke into the microphone, allowing my steady, calm voice to effortlessly overpower her frantic screaming. I told Beatrice that her precious family legacy was nothing more than a hollow, decaying shell. I explained to the captivated audience that Liam did not act alone in his massive financial deception. A fraud of this staggering magnitude required an experienced, willing accomplice to navigate the complex corporate banking channels. I told the room that the Caldwell matriarch was not a victim of her son's terrible choices, but rather the very architect who had actively funded his betrayal. Beatrice gasped loudly, placing her hand over her diamond necklace in a gesture of manufactured shock. She demanded that I stop speaking immediately, insisting she had absolutely no knowledge of Liam's offshore accounts or his illegitimate child. She boldly declared her complete innocence to the elite crowd, desperately trying to salvage her status among the Boston high society. I offered her a cold, merciless smile and turned my attention back to the audiovisual booth high above the entrance. I gave the technician a third and final nod. The massive digital screens behind the altar instantly flickered, casting a bright, unforgiving light over Beatrice's terrified face. The projection shifted away from the damning text message and filled the screens with highly classified banking documents. These were not generic corporate ledgers. They were direct authorization forms for massive international wire transfers originating from the parent conglomerate's primary reserve accounts. At the bottom of every single document, blown up to a towering 10-foot scale, was Beatrice's distinct, ornate signature. I calmly narrated the evidence to the breathless audience, detailing exact dates and specific dollar amounts. I explained exactly how Beatrice had bypassed standard accounting protocols to personally approve the diversion of millions into Liam's hidden offshore trusts. I did not stop there. I signaled for the next slide, revealing the property deeds and financial records for the sprawling luxury estate where Gillian resided. I explained that Beatrice had personally brokered the predatory mortgage using stolen corporate capital to secure a lavish home for her son's secret family, while actively plotting to leave me with absolutely nothing. I exposed her as a willing, enthusiastic participant in the total destruction of my life. I made sure every person in that room understood that the refined woman they had respected for decades was a ruthless thief hiding behind expensive jewelry and a prestigious last name. The reaction from the Boston elite was instantaneous and utterly brutal. The wealthy socialites and formidable matriarchs who had kissed Beatrice's cheek just an hour ago now recoiled as if she carried a deadly, contagious disease. They whispered furiously among themselves, their faces twisted with sheer revulsion. The high society hierarchy is built entirely on trust, reputation, and the projection of flawless superiority. Beatrice had violated their most sacred unspoken rules. She had brought a vulgar criminal scandal directly into their pristine world, and they would never forgive her. I watched her perfectly curated social standing evaporate into thin air. She looked around the room frantically, seeking a single ally, but found only cold, hard walls of absolute rejection. She stumbled backward, bumping into the altar and clutching her stomach as she struggled to breathe under the crushing weight of public humiliation. But the social execution was only a fraction of the devastation unfolding in the grand ballroom. The true destruction was happening among the senior logistics partners and international shipping investors seated in the front rows. The polite, wealthy veneer of the country club completely vanished instantly, replaced by the ruthless, cutthroat reality of high-stakes finance. The men and women who held the absolute power over Liam's corporate future did not wait for the ceremony to officially end. They simultaneously reached into their tailored suits and expensive evening bags, pulling out their cellular phones. The room filled with the quiet, frantic tapping of screens and hushed, urgent phone calls. I watched the lead investor for the European shipping expansion hold his phone to his ear, aggressively commanding his legal team to freeze all pending transfers to the Caldwell firm immediately. A prominent supply chain executive sitting 2 rows back hastily typed an email severing a massive 10-year distribution contract right there in his seat. They were actively dismantling Liam's entire empire brick by brick, dollar by dollar in real time. The brilliant future Liam and Beatrice had planned to fund with my stolen wealth was actively burning to the ground before their very eyes. Liam stood frozen near the altar, his mouth opening and closing, completely powerless to stop the bleeding. He watched his most vital financial backers stand up from their chairs, turning their backs on him and marching directly toward the exit doors. They did not say goodbye. They did not offer any polite excuses. They treated him exactly like the toxic, radioactive liability he had become. Beatrice sank to her knees on the floor, weeping uncontrollably into her hands as the terrible reality of their total ruin finally set in. I stood silently at the podium, gripping the silver microphone, watching the gathering storm absolutely decimate everything they had ever loved. The justice was swift, the execution was flawless, and I was completely, entirely free. The echo of shattered glass still hung in the stagnant, humid air of the grand conservatory. The high society crowd remained frozen in their pristine wooden chairs, utterly paralyzed by the magnitude of the scandal unfolding before them. Liam stood on the elevated marble platform, breathing heavily like a trapped, cornered animal. The arrogant, polished swagger that had defined his entire existence had been violently stripped away, leaving only a desperate, sweating shell of a man. His dark eyes darted frantically across the sea of horrified faces, searching for a single sympathetic gaze among his powerful investors. He found absolutely none. Realizing that his prestigious social standing was permanently obliterated, a raw, ugly fury twisted his handsome features into something entirely monstrous. He turned toward me, his hands balled into tight, shaking fists. He took a threatening, aggressive step forward, completely abandoning his carefully cultivated charm. His voice cracked with wild panic as he screamed that my spectacular little visual presentation meant absolutely nothing in the real world. He shouted at the top of his lungs, declaring that I had lost my mind and that my theatrical stunt would never change the concrete legal reality of our situation. He viciously mocked my intelligence, publicly announcing to the silent room that he had already secured his entire financial future. He boldly proclaimed that I was walking away from this marriage completely penniless because I had willingly signed a binding post-nuptial agreement. He desperately tried to reclaim his shattered dominance, pointing a trembling finger directly at my face and yelling that I was a foolish, naive woman who had just guaranteed my own total bankruptcy. I did not flinch or take a single step backward. I stood perfectly still, wrapped in my heavy ivory silk gown, absorbing his pathetic screaming with the clinical detachment of a scientist observing a failed experiment. I did not need to raise my voice to argue with a man who was actively burying himself alive. I simply shifted my calm gaze to the front row of the captivated audience. Harrison, my brilliant and ruthless corporate attorney, rose slowly from his velvet seat. He smoothed the lapels of his custom charcoal suit, radiating an aura of supreme, unshakable authority. The wealthy guests instinctively parted for him, treating him with the silent, anxious deference reserved for true power. Harrison walked gracefully toward the venue manager, who was standing paralyzed near the edge of the floral archway holding the heavy sealed manila envelope. The manager, visibly shaking from the intense pressure, handed the thick package to my attorney. Harrison accepted it with a polite nod and stepped onto the marble platform. The sheer predatory elegance of his movements commanded the absolute attention of every single person in the room. He did not look at Beatrice weeping on the floor or at Gillian trembling in her emerald dress. He locked his cold, calculating eyes directly onto my husband. Harrison extended his arm, holding the thick envelope out to Liam. He spoke with a quiet, resonant clarity that carried effortlessly across the massive glass room. He calmly informed Liam that a highly specialized legal delivery had arrived for him exactly as requested. Liam snatched the heavy package from Harrison's hand with aggressive, frantic energy. A sickening, twisted smile of profound relief briefly flashed across his sweating face. He genuinely believed that the envelope contained his ultimate salvation. He thought he was holding the fully stamped county court documents that would instantly strip me of my home, my investments, and my fundamental dignity. He aggressively tore the thick paper flap open, pulling out the crisp white legal documents. He intended to hold them up like a victorious trophy to prove his absolute dominance over me. I watched his eyes scan the bold black lettering at the very top of the first page. The physical transformation was instantaneous and absolutely breathtaking to witness. The arrogant, triumphant smirk froze on his lips before dissolving into an expression of sheer, unadulterated terror. He was not looking at a fabricated post-nuptial agreement. He was staring directly at a notice of immediate property foreclosure. Harrison stepped slightly closer, ensuring his resonant voice reached the ears of every wealthy executive in the audience. My attorney formally announced that my blind limited liability company had legally acquired the outstanding mortgage on the luxury estate located in the suburbs. He explicitly stated that due to heavily fraudulent loan applications, the entire balance was due immediately and the property was officially under seizure. Gillian let out a choked, horrified gasp from the sidelines, her hands flying to her mouth as the devastating reality violently hit her. The lavish, hidden paradise she thought she had secured for her secret infant was entirely gone. She was completely and legally homeless. Liam began to shake violently, his hands trembling so severely that the heavy pages rattled loudly against each other. He frantically flipped to the second document, desperately searching for an escape route that no longer existed. Harrison did not give him a single second to breathe. The attorney methodically explained the contents of the next page to the silent, captivated crowd. He announced an emergency federal injunction successfully freezing every single corporate asset and private offshore trust tied to Liam's name. Harrison detailed how the funds had been illegally diverted through fraudulent channels, completely trapping millions of dollars in an impenetrable legal vault. Liam let out a ragged, desperate sound, realizing his entire financial empire had been cleanly decapitated. He had absolutely zero access to his own stolen wealth, but the final execution was still waiting on the third page. Liam stared blindly at the official court summons, bearing the heavy red seal of the district attorney. Harrison delivered the final fatal blow with merciless professional precision. He stated that the summons was for multiple counts of aggravated corporate embezzlement and criminal forgery. The document clearly outlined how Liam had brazenly forged my signature to secure millions in commercial debt. The brilliant, untouchable mastermind was suddenly holding the concrete, undeniable proof of his own federal crimes in front of 200 vital witnesses. The weapon he had so carefully forged to destroy my life had been flawlessly intercepted, violently reversed, and thrust directly into his own chest. He dropped the thick stack of papers, allowing them to scatter across the white rose petals, completely crushed by the magnificent absolute finality of his ruin. The suffocating silence inside the Grand Botanical Conservatory was suddenly pierced by the heavy thud of brass doors swinging open. A cool evening breeze swept through the room, rustling the thousands of delicate white orchids, but the chill that settled over the crowd had nothing to do with the autumn weather. 6 men and women wearing dark, nondescript windbreakers walked into the lavish ballroom. They moved with a synchronized, purposeful stride that immediately commanded absolute authority. Gold shields gleamed under the amber lighting, hanging heavily from chains around their necks. These were not local police officers responding to a minor domestic dispute. They were highly trained federal agents from the Financial Crimes Unit. Harrison, my brilliant attorney, had quietly initiated this final sequence, the exact moment the offshore wire transfers were officially verified, because Liam had arrogantly utilized the corporate banking network to illegally funnel stolen assets across state lines and into foreign accounts. His petty marital theft had instantly escalated into a massive federal offense. The lead agent, a tall, broad-shouldered man with iron-gray hair, stepped onto the elevated marble platform. He did not ask for permission to interrupt the ruined ceremony. He walked directly toward my husband, who was still kneeling on the white rose petals, completely surrounded by the scattered pages of his own financial doom. Liam looked up, his face devoid of color. He tried to scramble backward, but his legs refused to support him. There was absolutely nowhere left to hide. The lead agent clearly stated his name and immediately began reciting his rights. The words echoed loudly across the vaulted glass ceiling, bouncing off the terrified faces of the Boston elite conspiracy to commit wire fraud, aggravated corporate embezzlement, interstate financial crimes. Every single harsh syllable struck the quiet room like a physical blow. 2 junior agents stepped forward, grabbing Liam's arms and hoisting him roughly to his feet. The sharp metallic click of the heavy steel handcuffs snapping shut around his wrists was the absolute loudest sound I had ever heard. It was a beautiful, definitive sound, ringing out as the ultimate punctuation to his fraudulent existence. Liam tried to struggle, twisting his broad shoulders and desperately pleading with the federal agents. He frantically looked out at the horrified 200 guests, begging his senior business partners to call their lawyers and intervene. He loudly screamed that it was a terrible misunderstanding and that he was a highly respected corporate executive. The crowd simply stared back at him with icy, unyielding disgust. The wealthy investors who had eagerly toasted to his brilliance just 30 minutes ago now watched him being treated like a common street criminal. Some guests turned their backs, entirely shielding their faces from the spreading scandal, while others quickly pulled out their cell phones to record the spectacular demise of a man who foolishly thought he was untouchable. The humiliation was absolute and inescapable. He was entirely stripped of his power, his dignity, and his precious freedom right in front of the only people whose opinions he valued. From the edge of the sprawling floral archway, a piercing, hysterical wail suddenly cut through the commotion. Gillian collapsed onto the polished hardwood floor, her hands desperately clutching the fabric of her emerald green dress. The arrogant, victorious smirk she had proudly worn all evening was completely eradicated. She sobbed uncontrollably, gasping for air as the cold, devastating reality of her situation violently crashed down around her. She was not going to be a wealthy socialite, living in a hidden luxury estate. The predatory mortgage was already foreclosed. The offshore accounts were entirely frozen. The man she had eagerly conspired with was currently being dragged away in handcuffs to face decades in a federal penitentiary. Gillian was left completely alone, entirely broke, and publicly humiliated. She looked at the sleeping baby in the expensive luxury stroller, realizing she had permanently tied herself to a convicted felon with absolutely no financial future. She begged the federal agents to listen to her, loudly claiming she was just an innocent victim manipulated by an older man. An agent simply walked over and handed her a formal summons, detailing her own active participation in the corporate fraud. Her weeping grew louder, echoing pitifully against the glass walls as she finally realized that her greed had destroyed her entire life. I stood perfectly still at the center of the marble platform, watching the chaotic scene unfold with cold, unblinking satisfaction. My heart beat with a slow, steady rhythm, completely free from the suffocating anxiety that had plagued me for months. I did not shed a single tear for the man being led out the door. I did not feel an ounce of pity for the weeping mistress on the floor or the shattered mother sobbing quietly in the front row. They had willingly conspired to destroy my life, strip me of my wealth, and discard me like discarded garbage. They had vastly underestimated the quiet, terrifying strength of a woman who meticulously managed the ledgers. I watched the heavy brass doors close behind the federal agents, taking my deceitful husband out of my world forever. The toxic storm had finally passed, leaving the air incredibly clean and undeniably pure. I smoothed the heavy ivory silk of my gown, feeling like a victorious soldier returning from a brutal but absolutely necessary war. I had aggressively defended my dignity, protected my future, and ensured that absolute systemic justice was flawlessly served. Thank you so very much for listening to my personal story today. If you found strength in this journey, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more stories of resilience. I would absolutely love to know exactly where you are tuning in from, so please leave a quick comment below with your home city and the exact time you're currently watching this video. Stay incredibly strong, protect your heart, and always remember that the undeniable truth will ultimately set you completely free. 6 months have passed since the heavy brass doors of the conservatory closed behind the federal agents, taking my deceitful husband away. The biting winter winds have finally surrendered to a crisp, bright spring, shedding light on a completely transformed reality. I sit at the heavy mahogany desk in my new corner office, looking out over the waking city. The morning sun warms the sleek glass windows, but the true warmth radiates from deep within my own chest. The suffocating anxiety, the endless nights of meticulously tracing fraudulent bank transfers, and the heavy burden of my manufactured compliance are entirely gone. They have been replaced by the quiet, unshakable peace that only absolute systemic justice can provide. The dust raised by that spectacular explosion has finally settled, completely coating those who tried to bury me. My executive assistant walks into the office and places the morning mail on the corner of my desk. Among the glossy industry magazines and pristine corporate envelopes sits a cheap, coarse paper envelope. It bears the unmistakable blue ink stamp of a federal penitentiary located upstate. I look at the sloppy, rushed handwriting spelling out my name. It belongs to Liam, the man who once wore flawless tailored tuxedos and commanded boardrooms with arrogant ease is now reduced to pleading through monitored prison mail. He is currently serving a 15-year sentence for aggravated corporate embezzlement, wire fraud, and interstate financial crimes. There are no silk sheets or golden hour cocktail parties where he is. There is only the rigid, unforgiving structure of federal lockup and the crushing realization that his brilliant criminal mind led him directly into a concrete cage. I do not open the envelope immediately. I simply let it sit there, allowing myself to reflect on the magnificent, flawless execution of legal karma. The collapse of the Caldwell Empire was not a slow decline. It was an absolute instantaneous financial decapitation. When the magnitude of Liam's theft was exposed, the corporate board completely severed all ties to the family name. The international investors immediately pulled their backing, triggering an avalanche of federal investigations that froze every single tainted asset. Liam was entirely stripped of his stolen wealth, his prestigious titles, and his false dignity. He is completely penniless, serving hard time, while the millions he legally diverted remain locked in federal custody forever out of his reach. The devastation did not end with Liam. The absolute ruin cascaded directly onto his mother. For decades, Beatrice had ruled Boston high society with a velvet glove and a diamond-encrusted fist. She genuinely believed her family legacy was a permanent, untouchable fortress, but the forensic audits revealed her explicit signatures on the wire transfers that funded her son's fraudulent schemes. She avoided a prison sentence only by cooperating with the federal prosecutors, but she could not escape the brutal financial and social execution. The astronomical legal fees and court-mandated restitution completely annihilated her personal wealth. The majestic Caldwell estate, the very symbol of their generational superiority, was seized and auctioned off to the highest bidder to satisfy the massive corporate debts. Beatrice was forced to pack her remaining possessions and move into a small, unassuming condominium on the outskirts of the city. The wealthy matriarchs and elite socialites, who once eagerly sought her approval, now crossed the street to avoid making eye contact. Her exclusive country club memberships were quietly revoked. Her invitations to charity galas simply stopped arriving. She's entirely isolated, living the rest of her days in the suffocating shadow of public disgrace, completely abandoned by the superficial world she valued above all else. And then there is Jillian, the arrogant young woman who stood in her emerald dress confidently expecting to inherit my life, is now drowning in a nightmare of her own making. The sprawling luxury estate that Beatrice had illegally secured for her was immediately repossessed by the bank. Jillian was swiftly evicted with nothing but her baby and a few suitcases of designer clothes she can no longer afford to maintain. She now lives in a cramped, noisy apartment in a neighborhood she would have previously mocked. She spends her days exhausted and bitter, locked in a completely futile legal battle. She aggressively files child support petitions against a man who is legally bankrupt and incarcerated. She tied her entire future to a sinking stone, believing she had secured a golden ticket to early retirement and endless wealth. Instead, she is trapped in a cycle of poverty and relentless struggle, permanently shackled to the legacy of a convicted felon. There are no more secret dinners at five-star restaurants or stolen weekends at luxury resorts. There is only the deafening reality of unpaid bills and the heavy, relentless consequences of her own boundless greed. I finally reach out and pick up the cheap, coarse envelope from my desk. I slide my silver letter opener under the flap and pull out the single piece of lined notebook paper. The page is filled with Liam's desperate, frantic scrawl. He begs for my forgiveness, claiming that the isolation is destroying his mind. He pathetically insists that he was misguided and manipulated, asking me to remember the good times we shared. He practically begs for a small deposit into his prison commissary account, or for me to speak to my lawyers on his behalf. It is a miserable, whining display of cowardice from a man who once planned to leave me destitute and destroyed. I do not feel a single ounce of pity. I do not feel anger or resentment. I simply feel nothing. The man who wrote these pathetic words is a complete stranger to me. I do not read the rest of the letter. I turn calmly in my leather chair and hold the piece of paper over the sleek black shredder sitting beside my desk. I let go. The machine hums to life, instantly pulling the paper downward and slicing his desperate lies into 100 meaningless ribbons. I drop the envelope in right behind it, listening to the quiet, satisfying mechanical grind. The destruction is clean, efficient, and absolutely final. The poison has been entirely eradicated from my life. I turn back to the massive window, watching the city move below me. The sun is shining, the sky is perfectly clear, and the future belongs entirely to me. The heavy soundproof doors of my newly acquired commercial space closed behind me, shutting out the relentless noise of the Boston traffic. I took a slow, deep breath, inhaling the familiar, comforting scent of warm electronics and polished hardwood. For years, I had managed the chaotic daily operations of this premier recording studio. I had balanced the intricate budgets, handled the demanding musical talent, and silently kept the entire business afloat, while Liam built his fraudulent logistics empire on the back of my endless sacrifices. Today, I was no longer the tireless employee working in the shadows. I was the absolute undisputed owner. The reclaimed assets from my comprehensive divorce settlement had provided far more than just comfortable financial security. They had given me the ultimate weapon of choice, which was total unconditional independence. When the court awarded me the remaining untainted capital and the heavy compensatory damages, I knew exactly where to invest it. I bought out the aging partners of the recording studio, completely taking over the massive commercial lease in the heart of the city. I spent the last 6 months meticulously stripping away the old, outdated management structure, replacing it with a sleek, highly efficient team that reported exclusively to me. Walking through the state-of-the-art control rooms and looking at the platinum records lining the freshly painted walls, I felt a profound sense of ownership. Every single microphone, heavy-duty cable, and massive soundboard belonged entirely to me. I had built a brand new kingdom from the smoldering ashes of my ruined marriage, and this one was completely legally impenetrable. I walked into my spacious corner office and poured myself a fresh cup of dark black coffee. I moved toward the massive floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking panoramic view of the Boston skyline. The bright morning sunlight caught the glass facades of the towering skyscrapers, casting brilliant golden reflections across the harbor. Somewhere out there, in those imposing corporate buildings, men like my former husband were desperately trying to maintain their fragile illusions of power. But I was no longer a victim of their toxic ambition or their reckless greed. My heart was entirely whole, and my spirit remained absolutely unbreakable. Society often teaches women that true strength is found in our capacity to endure pain. We are consistently told to be patient, to weather the terrible storms of infidelity and blatant disrespect, and to quietly hold our broken families together at the heavy expense of our own sanity. I had blindly believed that dangerous lie for 7 long years. I genuinely thought my silent endurance made me a good, faithful wife. I thought swallowing my pride to protect Liam's fragile, bloated ego was the ultimate noble act of love. But standing here, looking out over the waking city, I finally understood the fundamental, undeniably powerful truth. True strength is never about passively enduring abuse. True strength is having the raw, unapologetic courage to quietly and meticulously calculate your own absolute freedom. It is the profound ability to look a monster directly in the eye and smile warmly while you build the very trap that will permanently destroy them. I took another sip of the bitter, dark coffee, savoring the rich, robust flavor as it warmed my chest. I vividly remembered the dark days when my hands would shake with anxiety just thinking about Liam's shifting volatile moods and Beatrice's condescending, venomous whispers. I remembered the sickening, nauseating dread of discovering the offshore accounts, the secret child, and the forged legal signatures that were meant to ruin me. Those terrible memories no longer held any power over my daily life. They were simply the necessary catalyst that violently propelled me toward this magnificent, empowering reality. I had successfully excised the toxic cancer from my existence. The studio was thriving far beyond my wildest financial expectations. Independent artists and major international labels were booking recording sessions months in advance, drawn to the revitalized creative energy and the transparent professional culture I had personally implemented. I was completely in control of my own destiny. There were no more lies to uncover and no more devastating betrayals to fear. I slowly turned away from the massive windows and walked back out into the main tracking room of the studio. The heavy soundproof walls absorbed the chaotic noise of the outside world, creating a perfect sanctuary of creation and control. A talented local band was setting up their instruments behind the thick studio glass, laughing and tuning their guitars. I watched them through the pristine control room window, feeling the deep, resonating bass vibrate through the solid hardwood floor beneath my expensive leather boots. This space was my sanctuary. Liam had foolishly assumed that because I managed the background logistics, I was somehow entirely incapable of seizing the spotlight. He believed my quiet nature equated to weakness. He never realized that the person silently running the control board is the one who ultimately dictates the entire production. I had simply applied my meticulous logistical skills to the messy reality of our marriage. I audited his lies, tracked his hidden sins, and engineered a flawless, undeniable conclusion. Now he was locked in a federal cage, listening to the monotonous sounds of a prison block, while I stood in a kingdom built entirely on my own merit, listening to the beautiful, chaotic symphony of true freedom. The emotional journey had been brutally exhausting, but the magnificent reward was entirely worth the consuming fire. I had learned the hard way that justice does not simply fall from the sky or manifest from wishful thinking. You have to actively, boldly summon it. You have to gather the undeniable paper receipts, trace the hidden bank transfers, and securely lock the metaphorical doors before you finally drop the lit match. You must become the cold, calculating architect of your own personal salvation. I had transformed my deepest, profound pain into a relentless driving force. The fragile, weeping woman who had cried over her husband's treachery was gone entirely, replaced by a formidable business owner who fully understood the true, immeasurable value of absolute independence. The pristine white rose petals of that fake vow renewal ceremony felt like a distant, fading lifetime ago. The shocked applause from those wealthy investors had completely faded into irrelevance. The only applause that mattered to me now was the quiet, steady, victorious rhythm of my own thriving life. Sometimes, the strongest thing a woman can do is smile at the woman trying to replace her, knowing she holds the match that will burn their deceit to the ground. Have you ever had to smile through a betrayal while plotting your escape? Let me know your story in the comments below. And before you go, please tell me what city and time it is where you are watching this video. If you believe systemic karma always collects its debts, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of justice served.